Welcome back to my channel, where elegance meets mystery, and the smallest details reveal the greatest secrets. I am Hercule Poirot, and I believe that every crime, no matter how clever, always leaves behind a trace. With my little grey cells, I observe what others overlook. A misplaced button, a single footprint, a silence that speaks louder than words. Here, we journey together into the shadows of human nature, where deception hides in plain sight, and truth waits patiently to be uncovered. So stay close, because in this world of secrets, the game of deduction has only just begun. Chapter 1. The curtain that bled. It was an evening of sharp winds and heavy velvet, the sort that presses upon one with the weight of unseen eyes. Hastings and I had arrived at the Belvedere Theatre in Chelsea, at the invitation of Lady Aurelia Whitcomb, a patroness of the arts with a flair for dramatic gestures and an equally dramatic wardrobe. She had insisted we attend the private preview of The Ashen Hour, a new play whose author had managed to stir the London literary salons into a state of feverish anticipation. The Belvedere itself was an architectural relic from another age, balconies like petrified waves, plastered cherubs half hidden in shadow, and curtains so thick they seemed capable of muffling the world beyond. The air smelled faintly of dust and roses, a scent that spoke of many seasons past. We were ushered into a narrow box, overlooking the stage from a height that made the players below appear like figures in a doll's theatre. Lady Aurelia sat beside us, her gloved hands resting on the polished rail, her eyes flickering over the audience below with a cat-like awareness. She leaned toward me and whispered that tonight's gathering was not merely about the play. There are ... undercurrents, Captain Hastings. One might say the drama offstage may well outshine that upon it. Her words lingered in my mind, vague and alluring. The curtain rose to reveal a dimly lit drawing-room scene. The actors, costumed in somber Edwardian dress, moved with slow precision, their voices carrying lines that hinted at betrayal, money lost, and an unnamed threat. But halfway through the second act, a strange ripple passed through the theatre. I could not at first name it. It was in the subtle stiffening of the leading actress, in the almost imperceptible pause in the music. My eyes were drawn to the heavy crimson curtain at stage left. There, just visible in the light of a solitary lamp, a dark stain was spreading slowly downward, winding through the folds like a ribbon of shadow. It was Lady Aurelia who gave the first gasp, sharp and involuntary. The actors faltered, the audience murmured in confusion, and then came the whispered word, carrying like a draught through the hall, blood. By the time the stagehands rushed forward, the source of the stain was apparent. Behind the curtain, crumpled against the painted scenery, lay a man, his formal evening dress in disarray, one gloved hand outstretched as if to ward off an unseen assailant. His face, pale under the harsh gaslight, was one I recognized from the society pages. Sir Geoffrey Rainsford, a wealthy industrialist and, by some accounts, a silent investor in the very play we had come to see. The theatre's manager appeared, pale and agitated, trying to speak over the growing swell of voices. Somewhere, a woman began to cry. The actors clustered at the far side of the stage, exchanging glances in the uneasy knowledge that they had become part of a scene far stranger than any the playwright had intended. Lady Aurelia's eyes were fixed upon the body with a curious blend of sorrow and calculation. Then she turned to me, her voice low but steady. "You must fetch M. Poirot," she said. It was at that precise moment I realized he was already there, standing just beyond the curtain's edge, his immaculate figure somehow untouched by the confusion swirling around him. His gaze moved slowly, from the bloodied fabric to the still form of Sir Geoffrey, and then to the faces of those who had witnessed the strange tableau. "Ah," Poirot murmured, almost to himself, "already the theatre gives us both the drama and the dénouement. But, mon ami, we must be careful. It is not always the curtain that bleeds." The house lights flared abruptly, and the manager announced the performance was over. But in truth, I felt it had only just begun. Chapter 2. The first cloister audience, shaken from their velvet seats by the manager's agitated pleas, drifted toward the aisles like a tide of silk and murmurs. A few lingered, the curious and the shamelessly avid, but even they were shepherded away by the ushers who had turned uncharacteristically stern. The stage itself, stripped of illusion by the ugly brightness of the house lights, took on the chilly air of a dissecting room. The crimson curtain, mottled by the spreading stain, had settled into a heavy, sulky stillness. Poirot descended from the wing with a composure that struck me as slightly unreal. As if he were the only person in the theatre who had rehearsed for this precise moment, he doffed his hat to Lady Aurelia and to the trembling manager, and then, with a small inclination of the head, he knelt by the body of Sir Geoffrey Rainsford. A stagehand, a lank youth with an honest, freckled face, had hovered, uncertain if he should fetch a policeman or a mop. Poirot's glance dismissed the latter idea firmly. "Captain Hastings," he said, "be so good as to stand at the footlights and permit no one to cross the boards. We will try, for a moment, to hold the picture as it is." Sir Geoffrey lay, half on his side, his torso twisted as though he had fallen in a complicated manner, caught, perhaps by a fold of curtain as it settled. His gloved right hand had been flung outward in the dramatic posture death so often counterfeits. I had seen wounds in the field, but even I felt that peculiar queasiness one experiences when the brutality of fate intrudes upon an evening of polite entertainment. The blood that had soaked into the curtain was dark and tacky, pooling less than one might have expected. Poirot, fastidious as a surgeon, bent close without touching. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured, "how the stain is thicker along the fold nearest the floor." Gravity has had time to speak, and yet the wound here on the left side, beneath the rib, a narrow blade, introduced with decision, withdrawn with care. The manager, Mr. Lionel Catamol, a man of florid complexion and exasperated dignity, coughed behind his hand. "Monsieur, I must protest, should we not await the police?" "We shall welcome them," said Poirot amiably, "and we shall give them a scene unsmudged by good intentions. If you value your theatre, monsieur, and I judge that you do, help me by doing nothing." Lady Aurelia, who had recovered some of her poise, stood a little apart, her eyes very bright. "Sir Geoffrey was at the performance tonight as a patron," she said softly, "but he had enemies. Successful men often do." She looked as if she regretted the words, and added, "Perhaps I should not have said that." Poirot's eyes flickered to her. "One speaks as one feels, Lady Aurelia. We will catalogue the sentiment and return to it." He straightened, surveyed the wings, the ropes and pulleys that crisscrossed above like a cat's cradle, and then the set itself, a tastefully gloomy drawing-room with a chaise, a pianoforte, and a bow-front cabinet displaying imitation crystal. His gaze came to rest on a hat-stand near the prompt corner. Upon it hung a gentleman's opera cloak of black velvet, expensive and yet oddly out of place among the shabby props. Poirot touched the edge of the cloak with a single gloved finger and sniffed with faint distaste. "Moth crystals and another perfume, very faint. A gentleman's cologne that wishes to be discreet." "Sir Geoffrey's?" I asked. Lady Aurelia shook her head. "He affected no scent beyond the cigar smoke that preceded him." Mr. Catamol cleared his throat again. "Some of the gentlemen among the patrons sometimes deposit their things here. If the cloakroom is crowded," he spread his hands. "Tonight we were overwhelmed." Poirot nodded, but his attention had drifted to the proscenium where the curtain rope hung in a thick loop. He pinched it delicately and examined his fingertips. "Grease, freshly applied. Hastings, look along the lower rail, do you see, near the stage left pulley? A smear, as if a hand had steadied itself where it does not ordinarily belong." I knelt, and found, indeed, a smudge like the trace of bootblack or theatre grit. Upon the metal, above it, on the painted column that framed the stage, there was a shallow scratch, recent, cutting through the paint to a paler underlayer. "Someone climbed," I suggested, "or reached up quickly." "Perhaps," Poirot said, "but why, in the middle of Act 2? We shall ask the actors." He moved now to Sir Geoffrey's hand, still gloved, the stitching fine, the leather supple. Poirot's gaze sharpened. A button missing from the right glove, here at the wrist, torn away, not unstitched. "We shall seek its twin." His eyes shifted to the breast pocket of the dead man's tailcoat. It gaped slightly, as if something round had been removed. "He carried a watch," Poirot said, "or a small object in a case. It is gone, and here," he indicated a faint crescent of lint, blue thread, very fine, perhaps from a silk lining. A woman's sob flared again from the wings. The leading actress, Miss Verity Lane, had returned in a robe hastily thrown over her costume. She was a tall woman with a face both handsome and tired, as if beauty and labour had been long at private war. "I cannot bear it," she said to the manager, "to die here, of all places." He always sat so straight like a judge passing sentence. Her gaze fell upon Lady Aurelia with a flicker impossible to miss. "My lady, Miss Lane," Lady Aurelia returned, cool as crystal. You knew Sir Geoffrey well. Not well, Miss Lane said, but the word was brittle, and her hand tightened on the robe's sash. He was a presence. He was supportive. Poirot's smile was courteous and merciless. Supportive in money or in counsel. Her eyes slid away. He had opinions on the script. I ventured on everything, she said, almost fiercely, on the costumes, the casting, the length of the second act, on whether a woman of my age should play a woman of my age. She laughed, a ragged sound. He liked to improve matters that were not broken. Who discovered the body? Poirot asked. A stagehand, Mr. Cattermole said quickly, gesturing to the freckled youth. Ellis, here. He went to adjust the lamp. There was a shadow. On the shazand he cried out. Ellis, thus summoned, flushed to the roots of his hair. I swear, sir, I never touched him. I only pulled back the side of the curtain, and there he was. He gestured, helpless. We were told to watch the timing of the fall when the curtain comes in at the end of the scene. But it weren't due yet. Mr. Pike said. Mr. Pike, Poirot prompted. The stage director, Mr. Cattermole supplied. A stern man but competent. He keeps the show moving. Fetch Mr. Pike, if you please, said Poirot. And the playwright? The playwright, Lady Aurelia echoed. Mais oui, Poirot said mildly. The author is God in the theatre. Even the angels resent him. Mr. Pike proved to be a wiry fellow with a perpetual scowl that seemed less a mood than a skull shape. He insisted, with crisp economy, that the curtain in question was not scheduled to move until the musical cue a full 3 minutes later. We were running long, he said, but not that long. Nobody had called to be near that drape. Nobody. His gaze sliced toward Ellis, who wilted. And yet, Poirot said, somebody was near it. The grease, the scratch, the disturbed fold. Also, I am troubled by a small thing. The cue book. He pointed to a lectern near the prompt corner, upon which lay a copy of the script, fat with penciled notations. The page was marked for scene 6, but a corner 3 leaves ahead had been folded down very recently, its sharp triangles still springy. A person waiting for a moment that has not yet arrived, Poirot observed. A person impatient. Miss Lane stirred. Perhaps the prompter did it without thinking. The prompter, Mr. Pike said with contempt, thinks of nothing but tea. Another figure appeared, thin, pale, with an academic stoop and a tie that had never learned obedience. This was Mr. Roland Vale, the author of The Ashen Hour. He peered at the body, blanched, and fixed his gaze firmly upon a nail in the floor. I never liked that curtain, he said faintly. It competes with the dialogue. Your quarrel with Sir Geoffrey, monsieur? Poirot asked, gentle as a nurse. The playwright made a small, evasive movement with his shoulder. A creative difference. He wanted the ending altered from sorrow to triumph. Lady Aurelia suggested. From ambiguity to applause, Vale whispered. He said the public require a tonic. I said they require truth. Poirot inclined his head. And tonight, the truth requires blood. He turned once more to the body and to the space around it, his eyes surveying the floorboards with a patience that irritated Mr. Pike and intrigued me. Hastings, see here granules. He scooped a few grains upon a visiting card. Not dust. Fine, pale, and sharp to the touch. Not sugar, not salt. Sand, perhaps, but of an even size. From a costume hem, from a pocket, and here, a blue as we have already noticed. Mr. Cattermole made a muffled exclamation. The understudy's cloak, he said, then bit his lip. No, I am being foolish. Foolishness is often a timid cousin of memory, Poirot said pleasantly. Let it speak. The manager looked wretched. There was a mix-up in the cloakroom, too many patrons, too few hooks. Julius North, our understudy for the leading man, has a cloak lined with blue silk. He's proud of it, though heaven knows why. He was complaining earlier that his cloak had been mislaid, and then returned. I told him to grumble less, and act more. Julius North. Lady Aurelia's tone was unreadable. I thought he was dismissed. Mr. Cattermole winced. We cannot dismiss genius, my lady. We can only hope to contain it. Poirot's moustaches twitched. We shall speak with Monsieur North. For now, one more detail. He pointed to a gilt-framed announcement board just off the stage, where the cast list and understudies were posted beneath glass. The thumb latch was askew. This has been opened recently and in haste. A notice removed, or added. The theatre's air seemed to contract with the accumulation of these trifles. Poirot, satisfied that he had placed them where his mind could retrieve them later, stood very straight and smoothed his cuffs. "We have," he said, "a death that wants to be theatrical, and a theatre that suddenly wishes to be discreet. Between the two, there is a bridge of very small things. On that bridge we shall walk." "Do you think the murderer is among them?" I asked. "Lo, my friend," he said, and his eyes briefly warmed, "the murderer is always among them. The trick is to know which them is the right them." He looked to Lady Aurelia, who met his gaze without flinching. "You will keep the players where they are, if you please. We shall presently conduct a little series of conversations, but first," he gestured toward the audience doors, where the police were at last arriving, their boots announcing officialdom with dull certainty. "Let us see what the law has to say of art." And as the constables trod down the aisle and the curtain hung, gravid with silence and blood, Poirot's little grey cells were already at their quiet labour, arranging the first disparate tokens of truth into a pattern only he could see. Chapter 3. The gathering of suspects. The police, led by Inspector Poirot, a tall, spare man with a grey moustache and a manner that combined weary civility with a thinly veiled control of the stage with the practised efficiency of those accustomed to sudden disruptions. He made a cursory examination of Sir Geoffrey's body, muttered something about the yard's surgeon, and ordered it to remain in situ until the photographer arrived. Harrow's glance at Poirot was brief, but not unfriendly. "I suppose," he said in a voice that suggested the inevitability of rain, "that you'll be poking about in this one, Poirot?" Poirot bowed with a gravity that made the simple words sound like an invitation to a state banquet. "I am here, mon cher Inspecteur, not as the guest of the theatre, but as the guest of fate." And when fate insists, he allowed the sentence to hang, elegant and unfinished. Harrow sighed. "Very well, but keep me informed." Poirot turned his attention to the living always, the more dangerous part of the crime scene. The suspects, as if by instinct, had clustered at the far side of the stage, a little knot of uneasy humanity, caught between the artificial glow of the footlights and the darker wings beyond. Their expressions varied: shock, curiosity, wariness, but all shared the strained alertness of those who know they are under silent appraisal. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, stepping into the centre, "you will forgive me if I intrude upon the emotion of the moment, but you see, I must know you all. For a crime is a work of many threads, and one cannot understand the tapestry until one has met every weaver." The first to step forward was Miss Verity Lane, the leading lady, still in her robe, her painted stage face now streaked where she had wiped at it with a trembling hand. In her early 40s, she carried herself with the bearing of a woman who had fought to keep her place in a profession that values freshness above all. There was bitterness under her charm, like iron beneath gilt. Beside her stood Mr. Roland Vale, the playwright, nervous, reclusive, his spectacles fogged as if his own breath were too heavy for him. He had the distracted air of a man who forgets to eat when revising a scene, and whose true conversations are with his pages rather than with people. The manager, Mr. Lionel Cattermole, radiated bluster and the faint scent of cigar smoke. His florid face and restless hands suggested a man whose fortunes were tied to the theatre more closely than was comfortable, and who could not afford scandal unless he could control it. Standing slightly apart was Mr. Pike, the stage director, his wiry frame, rigid arms crossed, as if to keep his opinions from escaping. He gave Poirot the cool regard of a craftsman forced to work in the presence of an amateur. The freckled stagehand, Ellis, shifted from foot to foot, visibly wishing himself elsewhere. Youthful and earnest, he nevertheless carried the hunted look of someone who knows he has been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Lady Aurelia Whitcomb remained seated in a carved chair brought on stage at Poirot's request, her poise unshaken, her gloved hands folded neatly in her lap. Her role in this drama was less clear. She had been in the audience, yet her connection to the dead man hinted at deeper currents. Poirot's eyes moved to a tall, broad-shouldered young man leaning in the shadows. He was introduced by Cattermole as Julius North, the understudy whose cloak had been mentioned earlier. North's expression was that of a man perpetually poised between charm and defiance. His dark hair was slightly dishevelled, his evening attire immaculate but for a faint streak of dust on one trouser leg. Lastly, from the opposite wing, came a slender woman in a stagehand's black, her hair pulled into a severe knot, her eyes cool and appraising. "Miss Thelma Drake," Mr. Pike said shortly. "Wardrobe mistress." keeps the costumes in better order than the actors. Poirot's bow encompassed them all. You will permit, perhaps, that I ask each of you to give me the simplest of information. Your movements during the second act. Miss Lane went first, her voice steadier now. I was on stage for nearly all of it. In the wings only briefly, to change a prop. I saw Sir Geoffrey in his seat in the front row. He gave me a little nod during my line about betrayal by a friend. She gave a small, humorless laugh, a nod, as if to say, yes, I know, something about that. Vale adjusted his spectacles. I remained in the back row of the stalls, taking notes. I rarely move about during a performance. It unsettles the actors. He hesitated. I did not see Sir Geoffrey after the first act. Catamol spoke briskly, as if eager to be done. I was backstage, watching the scene changes. It is my duty to make sure the whole thing runs without visible hitch. I only learned of his presence here when Lady Aurelia mentioned it during the interval. Mr. Pike's tone was clipped. I was at my post by the cue book. I have no reason to wander. I heard nothing until Ellis called out. Ellis shuffled. I was checking the lamp, like I said. The shadow on the chaise was too deep, so Mr. Pike told me to see to it before the cue for the curtain. I thought I could do it, quiet-like. Then, I found him. Lady Aurelia inclined her head. I was in my box with Captain Hastings and Monsieur Poirot. I saw nothing of the side stage until the commotion began. Julius North, lounging insolently, offered his account with an easy smile. I was in the green room. I'm not on until Act 3, when I'm on it. Also, I don't haunt the wings. Someone brought my cloak back during the second act. Said it had been misplaced. Odd that I'd left it in the cloakroom before the performance began. Miss Drake, the wardrobe mistress, spoke last, her voice low. I was in the dressing room, repairing a hem. One of the chorus tore it during the waltz. I have witnesses. She did not look at anyone as she said it. Poirot, having listened without interruption, allowed a pause to lengthen just enough for the discomfort to settle in. You will notice, Miss Amos, that every account given is neat, complete, and leaves no room for intrusion. Life is rarely so tidy. His gaze drifted from one to the other. I think, perhaps, we shall find threads crossing where they should. Not. Inspector Harrow stepped forward. Are you suggesting? I suggest only, Poirot interrupted smoothly, that the second act was longer than 3 minutes, and yet, in those minutes, a man died by a blade that vanished, and an object from his pocket went walking away. Who walked with it? We shall see. He turned to Harrow. For now, Inspector, I ask you to keep our company here in the theatre. We will need the truth, and it is shite fleas in the open air. The suspects shifted uneasily under the inspector's gaze. The crimson curtain loomed at their backs, heavy with its secret, and somewhere beyond the footlights the city went on, unaware that within this ornate chamber the cast of a murder had been assembled, waiting for the next act to begin. Poirot's eyes shone with that particular alertness I knew too well. It was the gleam of a mind beginning to set its traps. The curtain had bled, yes, but it was the hearts and tongues of those before him that he intended to make bleed words, and those words, I suspected, would be far more revealing than they intended. Chapter 4. Poirot takes the stage. Inspector Harrow, having penned the first notes of his report at the prompt corner, called for the theatre doors to be shut, and a constable posted at each. His voice, by habit trained to travel, filled the chamber. Preliminary view. The deceased Sir Geoffrey Rainsford was stabbed backstage during the second act. Motive likely robbery, given the disturbed pocket. Opportunity afforded by chaos of performance. Suspect pool includes company and staff. He looked up, satisfied, as though he had sketched a simple box into which the facts would surely settle. Poirot, who had been standing with hands clasped behind him, contemplated the red pool stiffening at the curtain's hem. His expression was one of polite sorrow, not for the dead man alone but for the mutilation of order. Robbery, Inspector, perhaps, but theft that announces itself with a curtain that bleeds us at the discretion of a thief. It is the vanity of a mind theatrical. Harrow's mustache bristled. You're saying it was staged? A performance of murder? May we, at least, a person desired it to be seen and, at a moment calculated, not random. If one wishes only to steal, one steals in silence. Here there is a flourish. His eyes travelled. The rope, the scratch on the proscenium paint, the cue book with its impatient dog-ear. Where there is flourish, there is psychology. He turned, small and immaculate against the cavern of the stage, and faced the company. I have seen Poirot in drawing rooms and in kitchens, in smoking carriages, and once, memorably, on a river barge. But never had he so resembled a conductor, before an orchestra, a slight gesture, and all attention drew toward him, as if on wires. Before we proceed, he said, I ask each of you to stand precisely where you were when the alarm was given. Harrow began to object procedure. Contamination then, thought better and gestured for compliance. The actors and staff shifted into a tableau. Mr. Pike at the cue desk with its penciled hieroglyphs. Miss Lane near the wing, robe gathered, veil hovering at the edge, as though fearing to sit. Centre left, squarely planted, Ellis by the lamp. Lady Aurelia in the carved chair. Julius North drifting at the rear like a late-arriving thought. Miss Drake near the wardrobe rack, arms folded. Poirot stepped through them, not touching, making a mental map. Bon. Now impressions Hastings. He spoke softly to me, but pitched so that every soul heard. This too was a kind of theatre. Impressions. I echoed, surprised. Always the first are the truest. Miss Lane pride, held together by pins. A woman accustomed to obstruction who expects it now. Monsieur Vel delicacy of conscience, resentment of interference. Monsieur Catamol fear of scandal, that becomes anger to disguise it. Mr. Pike discipline, he despises the variable, therefore he despises humanity, during a performance. Ellis fright, yes, but also an innocence that produces clumsiness, when he tries too hard to be exact. Lady Aurelius a possession, she weighs every word because words are her currency in society. Monsieur North ambitions scented faintly with idleness. He would like to inherit without waiting, and Mademoiselle Dracorda, a woman who sees the threads that others ignore. He lifted a finger. Remember, Hastings, murder is made not only of act but of temperament. Harrow gave a strangled cough. Temperament doesn't hang a case at the Old Bailey. No, said Poirot gently, but it chooses the method, the stage, the moment. He knelt once more at Sir Geoffrey's side. This wound is precise, no frantic hacking, no messy thrusts, a blade small and narrow, introduced with sureness. The killer is not squeamish, not impulsive, or if impulsive, then trained by habit to control the hand. His gaze slid to the pianoforte on stage, and then to the wardrobe rack, where silver embroidery glinted. There are professions that teach such economy of movement. Miss Drake's gaze did not flicker. You mean a tailor or a seamstress? Perhaps, said Poirot, or a surgeon, or a swordsman, or a stagehand who snips, cuts, and pins without hesitation. He rose, dusting nothing from his knees. But observe also, Inspector, the missing object from the breast pocket. Not the wallet it remains, not the cufflinks, they are in place. Something small and round by the trace in the lining. A watch. Lady Aurelia, her eyes met his. Sir, Geoffrey wore a hunter case watch, with a dark enamel face, gifted by a consortium of industrial partners. He called it his reminder. Time is money, he'd say, in that dreadful, cheerful tone men adopt when they believe a proverb absolves them of cruelty. And tonight? Poirot asked. I did not notice, she said, but he would sooner have left his coat at home than that watch. Harrow scribbled, watch, missing probe motive. Poirot's glance at the note was tenderly amused. Let us not marry too soon, Inspector. The watch may be the motive. Equally, it may be the message. Message to whom? Asked Vale, almost in a whisper. To one in this room, Poirot said. Always, the message is delivered where the author can enjoy the audience. Catamol, abraded by nerves, burst out. Sir Geoffrey did not come here simply to admire the play. He meddled, I admit it. But murder, he faltered, sweat, stippling his brow. The papers will eat us alive. They will nibble what you give them, Poirot said. Give them the truth, and they choke. He moved to the proscenium scratch, touched it, and sniffed his glove. Fresh. The grease also. A hand steadied itself going up or down. Mr. Pike, permit me. Why would anyone climb here? Never. Pike snapped. Not during a scene. The only reason to be at that rope before the cue is to test a fall, which is done long before the house opens. And yet, murmured Poirot, someone did. For what? To peer behind the curtain, to ensure the sightline, or to arrange the bleed. The word travelled through them. Bleed. Poirot turned to Julius North. Your cloak, monsieur, the one with the blue silk lining. North's smile was easy, almost rueful. You were thinking of the threads on the floor. Blue silk is common enough. Quality is never common, said Poirot. You said your cloak went missing and returned in the second act. Returned by whom? An usherette, I think, brown hair. Ernest. I didn't ask her name. Not shoulders rose and fell in a patient half-shrug. I assumed some patron had taken it by mistake and discovered their error. Assumed, repeated Poirot, the mother of mistakes. He faced Miss Drake. Mademoiselle, your inventory of cloaks. Could such a garment be confused with another? Not by me, she said. By a flustered patron or an usheress. Her mouth thinned. If it was used to wipe a blade or conceal an object, I would know. Silk takes a stain that never truly vanishes. Then you will examine it, Poirot said, with Inspector Harrow present. Harrow nodded, grateful for an instruction that sounded like police work. Drake, with me. Ellis, bring the cloak. Miss Lane, who had been silent, now addressed Poirot with sudden heat. Do you think us monsters, M. Poirot? We act. We cheat. A little at lighting to make an eyelid tremble in the back row. But murder, madame, said Poirot, bowing. I think you human. That is worse, but also better. A silence settled, full of the small creaks and sighs of a grand old theatre learning a new play. Poirot used it. He paced to the announcement, bored with its skewed thumb latch, and eased the glass. Inside, the cast list understudies and tonight's notice were clipped. Across the bottom, a strip announced, by gracious request, Act 2, to be shortened by 2 minutes. The ink beneath had smudged where a damp finger had pressed. Mr. Pike, Poirot said. Who issued this? Pike stared. No one. That's not my hand. Indeed, Poirot said mildly. It is not a stage manager's tidy script. It is a man who writes with pressure and impatience. He bruises the paper. Also he writes from the wrist, not the fingers. He looked at Vale. The playwright flushed. I wrote to myself on a program earlier. I tend to smudge. But would you shorten your own act? Monsieur Poirot asked, to accommodate an investor's cough. Vale's lips compressed. No. Catamol raised his hands. The note is absurd. Act 2 ran long, if anything. I saw no such instruction until now. Yet it is there, said Poirot. A false notice creates opportunity. People adjust. Move sooner. Look away at the wrong second. The murderer, he counts seconds the way our Mr. Pike counts cues. Harrow said, unwillingly impressed. So you reject simple robbery? I reject what is simple too soon, Poirot replied. We will test robbery against the facts. For instance, Sir Geoffrey's watch is taken, yet his wallet is not. Why? Because the watch identifies a quarrel known to some here. Or because the watch was not stolen but exchanged. Exchanged. I asked for a duplicate, for a key, for a poison capsule, for a token of control. Poirot's face grew thoughtful. A watch can do many services if one loves time. Sir Geoffrey loved time. Lady Aurelia's gloved fingers tightened infinitesimally. He timed people, M. Poirot, by their usefulness. May I ask, Madame Poirot said gently, your history with him? She lifted her chin. He championed a charitable fund I oversee. He also attempted to champion me. I refused both the manner and the man, and we became enemies conducted under polite flags. And Miss Lane asked Poirot. The actress gave a crooked smile. He proposed that I be replaced after the first run. Freshness, he said. I told him, freshness rots quicker than talent. We had words. Words that cut. Poirot's voice was mild. Words that would have, had words been knives. He let it rest and turned so that they all could see him. The footlights reflected in his patent shoes. Beyond, the audience seats gaped like 1,000 dark mouths. Inspector Harrow believes in a crime of convenience and gain. I believe in a crime of composition, chosen scene, chosen time, chosen symbolism. The curtain does not bleed by accident. The rope is greased so that hands will not leave prints. The scratch is placed where a hasty balancing hand must travel. The dog-eared page promises a cue that is not yet due. All these, they are strokes on a canvas. We must ask, who here paints like that? Harrow folded his notebook. And your first impression of the official theory? That it is incomplete, Poirot said, and that the murderer wishes you to adopt it. When a mind pushes you to the obvious, step lightly. He clapped his hands once, a small percussive sound. Now, we proceed to the interviews. Not the long ones, none first. The little talks that jostle memories and bruise vanities. We begin with the person most likely to have touched Sir Geoffrey last, while he still breathed. We all looked involuntarily at Ellis. The boy swallowed. Poirot shook his head. Not our Ellis, he discovered he did not compose. We begin with the one who hates to wait for applause. His finger indicated Julius North. North's smile froze, then recovered its charm. With pleasure in Poirot, though I warn you, I have the virtue of being dull. Then, said Poirot, eyes alight, you will find me very interesting. He gestured toward the green room, and as North obeyed, passing beneath the sullen curtain, Poirot's gaze flicked once more to the stage-left rope and to the announcement board. Something had settled behind his eyes, a tiny bead of certainty that he refused, for the moment, to polish. The orchestra of suspects tuned itself. With nerves, the conductor raised his baton. The real performance Poirot was about to begin. Chapter 5. The first interview. The green room at the Belvedere was not the snug retreat one might have imagined from theatrical memoirs. It was a long, narrow chamber, its walls a faded green, more reminiscent of damp wallpaper than the verdant meadows it once aspired to imitate. A single gas lamp hissed softly in the corner, its light reflected in the spotted glass of a cheval mirror. A table scattered with script pages, powder compacts, and the detritus of hurried costume changes stood in the center, while an assortment of mismatched chairs lined the walls like an audience awaiting a play that would never begin. Julius North entered ahead of Poirot, with the casual grace of a man who considered himself entirely at home in any room. He leaned his long frame against the back of a chair, one hand in his pocket, the other idly straightening a small silver-backed hairbrush lying on the table. His smile was pleasant, too pleasant. Hastings might have said for a man in the company of a murder investigation. Poirot took the chair opposite him, folding his hands neatly upon his knee. Monsieur North, you are the understudy to the leading man. Yes, that's the polite term, North replied with an easy shrug. Standby ornament, occasional prompter, and sometime fetcher of tea. It's a living, of sorts. Yet tonight, Poirot said softly, you are also a man whose cloak goes missing during the very act in which Sir Geoffrey Rainsford is killed. It is returned before the act concludes. Such timing is precise. North's brows lifted, but his voice remained light. You believe someone borrowed my cloak to do the deed? A dramatic flourish, I'll grant, but not my style. I'd hardly risk silk that cost me a month's salary. Still, Poirot persisted. It was gone. Who had access to it? The cloakroom is a thoroughfare on nights like this, North said. Patrons brushing shoulders with chorus. Girls ushers darting in and out. Anyone could have lifted it for a lark or for something darker. He met Poirot's gaze squarely. I didn't touch it until the usher brought it back. I was in here, running lines I may never get to speak on stage. Poirot inclined his head. And Sir Geoffrey, did you know him well? Well enough to dislike him, North said, with a candor that caught me off guard. He thought an understudy was a hacker-on. He said it in so many words last week, in front of half the cast. I told him some men keep their position through skill, and others by buying it. A faint flush rose in his cheeks. I don't suffer insults easily. A temper, then, Poirot asked. A temper, yes, North admitted, but not a murderous one. If I'd wanted him out of the theatre, I'd have done it with words, not a blade. Poirot's eyes drifted to the silver-backed brush North had straightened earlier. A small habit, that arranging things, order in the little things, North said with a faint smile, when you can't control the big ones. Just so, Poirot murmured. Tell me, monsieur, during the second act, did you leave this room at any time? North hesitated, and in that pause the hiss of the gas lamp seemed to grow louder. Only once, he said finally, to fetch water from the tap in the passage. Less than a minute, and I saw no one except Thelma Drake, crossing to the dressing rooms. Poirot rose, adjusting his cuffs. Merci, Monsieur North. You will remain available to the inspector. As North departed, still moving with that faintly feline ease, Poirot studied the brush on the table once more, before turning toward the passage. A man who keeps his props in order, Hastings, is not careless about time. I wonder. We found Thelma Drake in the wardrobe room, a space narrower still than the green room, but with a far more ordered atmosphere. Costumes hung in neat sequence, each tagged with the role and performer's name. Shelves of fabric bolts and boxes of notions lined the walls, and a faint scent of lavender sachets lingered in the air. Drake herself was bent over a length of dark velvet, running a practiced hem with small, swift stitches. You are efficient, Mademoiselle Poirot observed, even when the theatre is a scene of how do you say chaos. Her eyes, grey and cool, flicked up. Order is my job. If I stop, everything frays. Even so, the fraying has begun, Poirot said. You crossed the passage during the second act. Did you see Julius North? She nodded. He was at the tap, said he. Was parched. I thought it odd there's water in the green room if you know where to look. And before that, Poirot pressed. Did you handle his cloak? No. She set her needle aside, though I noticed it in the cloakroom earlier. The lining's distinctive. If it was moved, I didn't see who did it. Poirot's gaze swept the room. Do you keep a record of repairs? Yes, she said, pointing to a ledger on the shelf. Every hem, every button. Actors never remember what they tear. Poirot opened the ledger and turned a few crisp pages, noting the tidy handwriting. He paused at an entry for that very evening. Act 2. Repair 2 blue silk lining. Men's cloak. The notation was in a different hand, smaller, more hurried. This is not your writing, mademoiselle. No, Drake admitted. Ellis brought it in. Said there was a snag in the lining. I was busy with a chorus dress, so he patched it himself. Clumsy work, but serviceable. Poirot closed the ledger. A curious thing. Hastings' understudy's cloak disappears, returns, and in between gains, a repair done not by the wardrobe mistress, but by a stagehand. Drake's mouth tightened. Ellis tries to be useful. Sometimes he makes work for me instead. Poirot thanked her and withdrew. As we made our way back to the stage, I asked, do you think Ellis is involved? Perhaps, Poirot said, or perhaps he is a carrier of things without knowing their value. We must be careful with the innocent. They can trample clues as easily as the guilty. Back on stage, the rest of the company waited under Harrow's watchful eye. Poirot glanced at them, then at the crimson curtain still sagging under its dark burden. The next, he announced, is Miss Verity Lane. The actress came forward, robe trailing, her chin lifted in defiance. You want to know where I was, what I saw, and whether I hated him enough to kill him. Just so, Madame Poirot said mildly. But let us begin with what you heard. She gave a short laugh. Heard the usualians flubbed, a cue. Missed a gasp from the audience when the curtain stained. Before that, during my brief time in the wings, I heard Sir Geoffrey speaking to someone. His voice carries. He liked to make sure it did. I couldn't hear the other person clearly, but the tone sharp, quick. An argument, but in low voices. Then I was back on stage, and by the time I returned, her hand fluttered, indicating the body beyond the curtain. Could you tell, Poirot asked, from which direction the voice of the other came? She thought a moment. From the passage toward the cloakroom, I think. Close, but not on stage. And you did not look. I had my cue, she said simply. The play comes first. Poirot inclined his head. A true professional, madame. She gave him a long, level look. I don't play at Murder and Poirot, but I recognize a performance when I see one. He tight. Let her return to her place without further question, though I could tell from the set of his shoulders that her remark had struck a chord. He stood for a moment, surveying the stage, the wings, the silent rows of seats beyond. Hastings, he murmured, each interview is a step, and the pattern begins to emerge. The cloak, the repair, the argument, the false note about Act 2 all are threads. Now we must see who pulls them tight. And with that, he turned his gaze upon Mr. Lionel Cattermole, who blanched under the weight of it. Monsieur Poirot said, it is your turn to speak. Chapter 6. The first false lead. Mr. Lionel Cattermole came forward with the air of a man summoned by fate and creditors alike. He had the bulky dignity of a prosperous alderman and the eyes of a fox caught in lamplight. Poirot indicated a pair of chairs set just off the prompt corner, and Cattermole lowered himself as though the seat might charge a fee. Cattermole, Poirot began pleasantly. Your theatre is famous for its acoustics. Alas, it carries also the quarrels. We are told Sir Geoffrey argued with someone in the passage during Act 2. Cattermole wet his lips. Actors quarrel, monsieur. Authors sulk. Investors complain. That is the orchestra pit of my life. As for Sir Geoffrey and I exchanged words during the interval. He wished for sprightliness, his word, not mine in the second act. I explained the play is a sorrow in 3 movements, not a jolly operetta. Did he threaten your finances? Cattermole's jaw shifted. A gentleman of means never threatens, he suggests. Sir Geoffrey suggested that if the evening failed to show promise his phrase again, he would reconsider his participation in our mortgage extension. I see, said Poirot softly, and a reconsideration would be painful. Ruination, Cattermole said, the word flat and honest at last. But I did not kill him to save my theatre. Theatres die every day without assistance. Poirot's gaze slipped to the announcement board with its smudged line about shortening. Act 2. Who, then, wrote that? I did not, Cattermole said quickly. Nor Mr. Pike. It is vandalism by pen. And yet the notice might have been convenient, Poirot murmured. People move 2 minutes early. A rope is touched. A curtain bleeds at a moment it should not. A small adjustment in time may be the largest of conspirators. Cattermole flinched. You speak as if time were a weapon. At the Belvedere, it is a luxury. Inspector Harrow, who had drifted nearer, interposed with a practical cough. Where were you at the top of Act 2, Mr. Cattermole? Backstage left, then the corridor by the cloakroom, then the prompt corner. Constant motion. A manager's blessing and curse. You admit you were near the cloakroom, Harrow said, pouncing. Close enough to meddle with the cloak. I admit, I walked past a room full of coats. Cattermole snapped. Had I known a cloak would become a prime exhibit, I would have bowed to each individually. Poirot lifted a mollifying hand. We will not conclude before we begin. He glanced toward the wings. Mr. Pike, if you please. The stage director appeared as if summoned by cue. His austerity had acquired a smear of dust across one sleeve, and his mouth was set in a straight line as though syllables were nails. He preferred not to hammer M. Pike. Poirot said, You are a man of order. Tell me what disorder you observed. Pike considered. A shadow too far across the chaise. I told Ellis to trim the lamp. The curtain rope felt tacky when I checked it before the scene. A thing I meant to speak to the flyman about after the act. The cue, book someone, turned a page forward. I turned it back. In short, small offences against discipline. I have seen worse, but rarely altogether. Would you shorten Act 2? Poirot asked mildly. Over my dead body, Pike said, without irony. Did you speak to Sir Geoffrey? I avoid patrons, Pike replied. A stage runs on cues. A box runs on gossip. I keep to my own kingdom. Harrow made a note and jerked his chin. Ellis. The freckled youth shuffled up, cap in hand, though he had not been wearing one. His fingers were black with grease and some paler dust that caught the light. He smelled faintly of lamp oil and lavender, an oddly domestic whiff among the ropes and paint. Your apron, boy, Harrow said brusquely. Let's see what's in it. Ellis obeyed, cheeks flaming. He turned out a jumble onto the stage. Table, a stub of pencil, a twist of thread, safety pins, 2 small brass screws, a folded program, and Harrow's hand darted the gleam of metal. He lifted it delicately, and a murmur ran through us. In the inspector's palm lay a hunter case watch, dark enamel face, the lid scratched with a shallow plume design. Lady Aurelia's breath caught, a tiny, betrayed sound. Sir Geoffrey's. Ellis, blanched, the colour of old paper. I never, sir. I don't. Harrow's voice had the satisfied click of a latch seating. How did this come into your apron, my lad? Ellis stammered. I swear, Inspector, I was at the lamp. I never touched the gentleman. I only when the usher brought the cloak to Miss Drake. I took it to the wardrobe room. It was heavy, something in the pocket. I thought it was a paperweight for the hem. We put cloaks on the table when we mend. Maybe it fell out. Tide didn't see paperweight. Harrow repeated, savouring the word. And then, you slipped it into your pocket to keep it safe, did you? And forgot, or thought better, too late. Ellis's eyes filled with panic. No, sir, I wouldn't steal a thing. I'm saving for an engagement ring. Why would I throw away my future for a trinket? Because temptation is quicker than prudence, Harrow said grimly. You handled the cloak, you found the watch, and Sir Geoffrey ends the act behind a bleeding curtain, a tidy circle. Poirot, who had been watching Ellis's hands rather than his face, spoke quietly. Inspector, one moment, Mademoiselle Drake. Earlier, you said you could smell a stain that silk would not forget. Did you examine the cloak? Miss Drake came forward with the garment across her arms, blue lining turned to the light. There's a patch at the hem. Ellis's work, poor but harmless. No blood, no oil. Only she leaned and sniffed. Lavender. Your sachets, Harrow said dismissively. She shook her head. I keep lavender cakes among the muslins, to discourage moth. This is concentrated like a sachet tied and carried. Poirot nodded, his eyes slipping back to Ellis's apron. Among the jumble, the folded program had split slightly. From the tier peeped a tiny muslin bag, stained darker violet. Poirot lifted it by its string and held it to his nose. Lavender. Yes, and another note cologne, very faint. He sliced the bag with a knife. Within lay not dried flower heads but fine sand of an even size, pale and sharp to the finger. I remembered suddenly the granules he had scooped on his visiting card. Harrow frowned. What play acting is this? A sachet used as a weight, Poirot said, for a curtain hem or to ensure a drape falls, as one wishes. He let the sand trickle back, a tiny hourglass. Pike, would a person use such a thing? Pike hesitated, then grudged. Wardrobe. Sometimes weights hems to improve a fall. We use lead shots sewn in. That he nodded at the muslin, is a bodge. Miss Drake bristled. Not my bodge. Harrow's patience reasserted itself. Bodge or no, the watch is in the boy's apron. That's theft, and where there's theft, our law says, there may be murder to cover it. Catamol seized the moment like a drowning man catching a plank. A wretched, foolish boy. There, Inspector. You have your culprit and I, alas, my scandal. We will close for a fortnight, of course. Out of respect, do not, Poirot said, very softly, close the theatre in your mind, Monsieur Catamol. The performance has not yet reached its interval. Harrow bristled. You dispute the evidence. I interrogate it, Poirot replied. He turned to Ellis. You repaired the cloak's lining. Why? Ellis swallowed. There was a small tear near the pocket mouth, just a catch on a nail. I thought, if the lining gaped, a gentleman's things might fall out. I did a quick patch. Thelma Miss Drake was busy. I meant well. Good intentions, Poirot murmured. Leave very clean fingerprints. He looked back to the watch in Harrow's hand. Inspector, is the watch wound? Harrow snapped the lid. Stopped at 8:02, the cue for the musical swell, Pike said, surprised into speech. 3 minutes before the curtain fall. Poirot's eyes were suddenly hooded. You see, Hastings, time as a weapon. The killer wanted us to know a minute, but not the truth of the minute, or the boy knocked it. Harrow said, he fumbled it into his apron. It stopped. Perhaps, Poirot allowed, but the pattern does not love. Perhaps his gaze moved over the assembled faces. Relief, gathering like color on Catamol. Simmering dislike in the angle of Julius North's mouth, as he watched Ellis, Miss Lane's expression softening towards pity. Vale's penitent stoop deepening, as if guilt could be assumed like a coat to spare another. Lady Aurelia alone was perfectly still, her attention fixed not on the boy or the watch but on Poirot, as if measuring the distance between his question and his answer. Harrow clapped his notebook shut. I shall hold Ellis on suspicion of theft and pending further inquiries. The constable at the aisle moved a step closer. The boy flinched. Hold him. Yes, Poirot said mildly. Hold him. Do not conclude him. For the murderer, Inspector, loves nothing better than a tidy arrest. It frees a hand for the second act. The second act, Catamol squeaked. Poirot's eyes slid to the blood-dark curtain. When one composes theatrically, one often cannot resist a reprise. The attempt to shorten the act, the weighted hem, the watch placed where it would be found, and misread, the rope grist knot, to avoid fingerprints but to create the illusion of carelessness. These are not the gestures of a pickpocket. They are the brushstrokes of a mind that paints scenes. And whose mind is that? Harrow demanded. Poirot smiled, small and infuriating. We will discover. But first, we speak to the lady who does not misplace words. He turned, not to Miss Lane or to Drake, but to Lady Aurelia. Madame, would you grant me 5 minutes in the manager's office? There is a question of charity and of timing I would beg to clarify. Lady Aurelia rose with the unhurried grace of a woman practiced in entrances. 5 minutes, Monsieur Poirot, she said, and as she passed Ellis, she placed a gloved hand for the briefest second on his sleeve, a gesture that was either benediction or warning. We followed them toward the shadowed corridor. Behind us, the constable's hand closed, not unkindly, on Ellis's arm. The theatre exhaled, the way a house does between thunderclaps. To the inspector, the watch in the apron was the story written clear. To Poirot it was a line delivered, a shade too well. And somewhere so I felt with a prickle at the nap someone in that company smiled in the dark and began to mark their cue for the next scene. Chapter 7. The psychological game. The manager's office was a cramped, high-seat room tucked behind the stage, smelling faintly of dust and the burnt sweetness of old stage lamps. The wallpaper, patterned in faded gold scrolls, seemed to sag slightly under the weight of framed playbills from more triumphant seasons. In the corner stood a filing cabinet, with drawers that refused to close fully, and on the desk a silver inkstand, its surface scored by the restless scratching of pens over many years. Lady Aurelia Whitcomb stood by the single narrow window, her profile caught against the pale glimmer of the street lamps outside. She had removed one glove and rested her bare fingertips lightly on the sill, as though considering whether to push it open. Poirot, closing the door softly behind us, moved not toward the desk, but toward her, taking in the set of her shoulders, the precise stillness of her head. "Madame," he said gently, "when the inspector produces a watch from a boy's apron, the simplest of conclusions presents itself, but simplicity, I think, is not to your taste." She turned her head fractionally. "You imagine I am invested in this little drama, M. Poirot." "I do not imagine," he said. "I observe. You were the first to identify the watch. You spoke of its sentimental presentation to Sir Geoffrey, and you have, if I may say, the air of one who knows the measure of a man's enemies as well as his friends." Her lips curved faintly. Sir Geoffrey collected both, in equal numbers. He believed it a mark of success. "And you, Madame?" Poirot tilted his head. "You were counted in which column?" She drew on her glove with deliberate precision. Each finger eased into place, as if by she clothed every before letting it be seen. "Once, I was in his good graces. That ended when I refused both his business proposition and his personal one. He preferred women who could be flattered into obedience." "Then there was enmity," Poirot said softly. "There was an understanding," she corrected. "We would oppose each other in public with the elegance of fencing partners, never with the brutality of brawlers. I had no desire to destroy him." Poirot's gaze rested on her gloved hands. "And yet, Madame, you were in the theatre this evening. You spoke to Hastings of undercurrents before the play began, and when the curtain bled, you did not look surprised only alert. For the first time, something flickered in her eyes, there and gone again. Because I saw at once what it meant," she said quietly. "Not robbery, not accident. A message, delivered with theatrical flourish. Sir Geoffrey was a man who believed himself invincible in the company he kept. Someone wanted to prove him wrong." Poirot smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "And you, perhaps, know whose hand would wish to sign such a message." "I have suspicions," she said, "but suspicions are not proof." She glanced at the desk. "May I sit?" He gestured permission, and she lowered herself into the manager's high-backed chair, the leather creaking faintly beneath her. "Sir Geoffrey kept a small ledger," she said, "of his private loans and investments. He liked to remind his debtors how intimately he knew their finances. If it is missing from his person, it will be in that desk or gone entirely." Poirot moved to the desk, his fingers resting briefly on the cool silver of the inkstand before he began to open drawers. Receipts, faded telegrams, old playbills, but no ledger. "And you believe someone tonight had a reason to make it disappear?" "I believe," she said, "that whoever killed him did not do so solely for that watch." There was a knock at the door. Inspector Harrow stepped in, his moustache a bristling silhouette in the dim light. "We're ready for your next interview, Poirot, unless you've found a signed confession in here." "Not a confession," Poirot said, "but perhaps a line of dialogue." He closed the desk and thanked Lady Aurelia with a courteous nod. "We will speak again, Madame. There is much you have chosen not to say." When we rejoined the others on stage, the tension had thickened, each suspect occupying a small island of wariness. Miss Verity Lane paced slowly near the wings. Julius North sat slouched in a chair, his eyes half-lidded but alert. Roland Vale scribbled on the margin of a script, as though to shield himself from notice. Catamol hovered by the curtain as if willing it to draw itself closed on the night entirely. Poirot did not take the obvious step of calling the next name. Instead, he let the silence grow, walking slowly from one end of the stage to the other, his gaze moving deliberately from face to face. "You know," he said conversationally, "in the theatre, the understudy waits for the principal to falter. In life, also, there are understudies, people who wait, with perfect courtesy, for another to fail so they may step forward." The remark had its intended effect. North's head lifted. Miss Lane's pacing slowed. Even Vale looked up from his scribbles. Poirot turned toward the playwright. "Monsieur Vale, a moment with you, if you please." Vale rose reluctantly, moving with the awkward gait of one unused to being the center of attention. "If you must," he said. "In writing your play," Poirot said, "you created a second act in which betrayal is revealed in an unexpected scene. This, I think, is your favorite part." "It is," Vale admitted. It's the hinge of the story. The moment the audience realizes everything before was preparation for this one blow. Poirot's eyes glimmered, and tonight, in life, such a blow was delivered. Do you think our murderer has studied your work? Vale's Adam's apple shifted. Anyone who's been at rehearsals has heard it enough times. Sir Geoffrey, Poirot said, wanted changes. What would he have cut? The second act as it stands, Vale said bitterly. He wanted a happy reveal instead of a cruel one. He would have destroyed the structure entirely. And so, Poirot said softly, you wrote your scene exactly as you wished on stage, and oft. Vale's eyes widened. If you're suggesting I killed him to protect a script, I suggest, Poirot said, that you understand how to time a revelation for maximum effect. And tonight, that skill was employed by someone. Vale made a visible effort to contain himself, then looked to the people who set the cues. M. Poirot, not the man who writes them. He turned sharply away and returned to his seat. Poirot watched him go, then addressed the room as a whole. You see, Ms. Amos, the truth has its own timing. The guilty man or woman thinks to control that timing. But it is like the theatre. The audience may be surprised, but the director, he knows exactly when the curtain will fall. As he spoke, I noticed a subtle shift among the suspects. The glances between them were no longer of simple mistrust. They were calculating, measuring not only their own positions but each other's. Poirot had sown the first seeds of unease, and I could see him watching as they began to grow. Hastings, he murmured, as we stepped briefly aside. You see, already the play within the play has begun. They will betray themselves, given just the right cue. And what will that cue be? I asked. His mustaches twitched. Something small. Always it is something small. A movement too quick, a word too ready. We will give them opportunity. And with that, he returned to the circle, smiling pleasantly, as though the whole affair were nothing more than an interlude, before the evening's entertainment resumed, while I, knowing his ways, understood that the entertainment had only just truly begun. Chapter 8. A second act in shadow. There are theatres in which calamity arrives with thunder and ropes snapping. At the Belvedere, it came on slippers. We had barely returned from the manager's office when the house lamps flickered once. Twice, like eyelids fighting sleep, and died. A gasp rose from the stall's darkness, a scattered rustle of silk. Harrow swore. Cattermole shouted for the electrician. Mr. Pike, with the reflexes of a campaigner, snapped, "Hold positions," and went for the cue desk by instinct alone. In the brief velvet of blackness I heard something else, a small, purposeful sound, the rasp of a drawer, the whisper of paper. Lights struggled back in thin stages, the meagre ghosts of the emergency bulbs. The pale bloom of a single working baton over the stage. No one moves, Harrow barked, now clearly enjoying a command that sounded like police. Constable, doors, boots, answered at the aisles. Poirot had not moved at all. He seemed, in the dimness, to possess his own radius of clarity. It is nothing, he said mildly, only the theatre trying to blink away what it has seen. But blink, my friends, and one misses the little change, the petite adjustment. The what? I began, but a cry from the passage cut me short. Mr. Cattermole, sir, the office. It was the brown-haired usher, white as muslin, at the door. We went together, Harrow first, then Cattermole lumbering. Poirot and I closed behind down the narrow corridor, whose walls had learned too many confidences. Smoke lay there like a thin shawl, not the brute reek of conflagration but the acrid fume of paper hurriedly wronged. The manager's door stood ajar. Within, a fringe of flame still licked along the grate. Above it the air trembled with heat. Water. Cattermole blundered to the scuttle, sloshed with a stage bucket, and doused the last little tongues. The room was as we had left it, almost. The desk drawers gaped, their neat squalor converted into litter, envelopes gutted, rubber bands sprung, a paper knife on the floor, like a little blade that had decided to lie down. Ashes in the grate glowed red as a critic's pencil. My papers, Cattermole wheezed. You've seen. Inspector No. 1 was admitted. This is devilry. Harrow crooked a hand. Hold, stand away from the desk. He stooped with a handkerchief, lifted one charred slip from the edge of the grate, and blew gently. A corner of ruled paper, survived edge singed, center scrawled in a strong, impatient hand. El Cattermole, extension at 6.25%. Review by Lent. Cattermole made a strangled sound. Those are private arrangements notes Sir Geoffrey kept, Harrow said grimly. Kept, and someone has endeavored to unkeep, who had access. Anyone with a key to my office, Cattermole snapped. Which is to Sam himself. His hand fumbled at his waistcoat. The keyring there looked dull and offended. And I left this room with you 5 minutes ago. Nan, Poirot said gently. You left it with us and also with the theatre. A key is an object. Access is a habit. When habit knows that Mr. Cattermole is called from the room, it follows. He had drifted, while he spoke, to the desk's side drawer, the shallow one that a man adopts as a tray. He did not touch. He looked. See, Hastings, he murmured. A little mark across the brass rouge, perhaps, dragged by a thumb. Not dust, not the grease of the rope, this is finer. It shines in a way the grease does not. I bent, squinting. There it was, a faint rosy veil, caught in the cross-hatching of the metal. Makeup, I said. Stage rouge, Poirot agreed. Applied with pressure, smudged in haste. A person with hands not completely clean, who forgets that brass remembers. Miss Verity Lane stood in the doorway, robe clutched close, color rising beneath powder. There is rouge on 100 surfaces backstage, she said, her voice steady and indignant. Half the company breathes carmine and powder between acts. If you're looking for a woman's guilt, Poirot, look where the gossip points. You'll have your easy story. I never like the easy story, Poirot said mildly. It does not fit well. His eyes had gone to the grate again. He bent, used the paper knife to tease out another fragment, and cooled it with a breath. This one was headed not L. Cattermole, but a pair of initials, cramped and elegant. A. B. Salary. Beneath, a figure startlingly large blotted where the ink had boiled. Verity Lane said nothing. Her hands, within the robe's sleeves, tightened. Sir Geoffrey kept ledgers. Lady Aurelia murmured from the doorway. He liked to have the measure of people. Her eyes moved to Cattermole. Of all of us, Harrow straightened. The fragile papers preserved now in his notebook like rare moths. So, someone has tried to destroy records that might show motive debts, leverage, private arrangements, a tidy accompaniment to murder. You, Mr. Cattermole, will please make a list of all who possess keys, and when you last saw each in their proper place. Cattermole nodded miserably, dabbed his brow, and stared at the desk as though it might explain itself. Poirot, meanwhile, had turned from the grate to the window. Open, Hastings, he said. I worked the stiff sash. A puff of street cold came in, bearing the faintest thread of lavender. Again Poirot murmured, our scent that masks other scents. He leaned outward, inspecting the sill. Upon the stone lay a small scatter of pale grains, caught in the paint Ridges Brothers too. The sand from the sachet, weighted curtains, weighted decisions, he said softly. Whoever brought their little bag of gravity has been busy. We returned to the stage to find that busyness had not confined itself to ledgers. Miss Drake met us at the wing with a face stripped of its usual composure. The prop table, she said, in a voice she kept level by force. Someone's taken the Act 3 turknife. Mr. Pike swore with simple purity. Inventory, correct. An hour ago, Drake said, a matched pair paper knives for the desk scene. One remains, one is gone. They are not sharp, they look sharp. Then they are ideal, Poirot said, for a mind that likes the theatre of things. He moved to the prop tabular, neat kingdom under Drake's rule and surveyed the labelled rows, spectacles, blank letters folded and addressed, a pewter, inkwell, the single remaining knife in its leather sleeve. He did not touch, he noticed, the sleeve for its twin, also gone. Drake said tersely, so it may be carried without suspicion. Harrow's jaw hardened. A second weapon, or a gesture toward one. Either way, someone is preparing a follow-up. I will have the company searched. You will have the green room searched first, Mr. Pike said, authority reasserting itself. No one leaves the backstage. Wardrobe, stay with me. Gently, Poirot murmured. The person who steals the paper knife wants us to look at the knife. Let us look, but not only there. Lady Aurelia's gaze had gone to the crimson curtain again, as one checks the horizon for weather. You think there will be another display? I think, Poirot said, that when a mind sets itself to composition, it cannot resist completing the phrase. He turned to Ellis, who stood, pale and bewildered, under a constable's guard. Young monsieur, when you repaired the cloak, you used which thread? Blue, Ellis said, flinching at his own voice. Silk. It was what I had in my pocket. Poirot nodded. And you weighted the hem? No, sir. I would never miss. Drake would have my ears tranquil. Poirot soothed. Only one person in this theatre loves waits tonight. The search commenced, methodical as Pike's scene changes. Pockets were turned out, boxes opened, the underside of chairs inspected. A chorus boy, roused and astonished, contributed a tin of pastilles and a dog-eared novel to the evidence table. No knife, no sleeve. Only, from Vale's worn satchel, the inspector drew a coil of thin twine and a folded paper on which Vale, in a sudden flush of defensiveness, set his hand. "Scene beats," he said. "I tie my structure in my head with string. It helps me count." "Count what?" Harrow asked. "Breaths," said Vale, and looked, for an instant, ashamed of the truth. Poirot's brows rose slightly. "A man who counts breaths counts seconds, Inspector. He does not need false notices to find them." Harrow grunted, neither convinced nor dismissive, and turned to the last of the obvious receptacles, the cupboard at the end of the upstage wall, where spare drapes and a broom or two lived without aspiration. He hauled it open. From within, something slid, bumped the threshold, and turned half over to show its face to the world. The missing leather sleeve. Empty. Mr. Pike's nostrils flared. So it was planted to be found. "Planted, yes," Poirot said, kneeling, and scented. He lifted it, held it to his nose. "Lavender again, the faint ghost of cologne that wishes to be discreet." "North," Harrow snapped, wheeling. "Your gentleman's scent, the one on your cloak." North's smile was tight. "I told you, Inspector, any number of patrons." Poirot's hand, light as a conductor's baton, cut the air. "Stop. The scent is a string woven through many things. At the end of the string is not necessarily the wearer, but the person who borrows other people's notes to write their own chord. We will not play their harmony yet." A mutter moved through the company, the susurrus of fear schooling into suspicion. Miss Lane's eyes, dark and proud, went to Julius North, his two catamount veils to the floor. Drake's to her table where order had been wounded. Lady Aurelia alone looked nowhere and everywhere at once. Poirot stood. "We have now a second mischief. The manager's papers burned partly, not enough. A prop knife, Miss Lane displayed, not wielded. These are not acts of desperation." His voice, very soft, made the words seem almost tender. "They are acts of composition. The murderer continues to conduct." "Then we must stop the music," Harrow said, iron returning to him. "Constable, double the watch. No one leaves this stage. Mr. Pike, you will account for your crew. Drake, lock your table." "Allow me one small liberty," Poirot said. He went to the announcement board once more, eased the glass, and with the blunt end of a pencil adjusted the smudged line about Act 2 by a fraction, straightening it, merely so that it sat demure among the typed notices. "There we do not erase the lie, we make it neat. The author of it will not be able to bear that." "You expect them to return?" I asked, startled. "Artists return to their brushstrokes," he said. "They cannot resist the correction." He looked past us, into the auditorium's darkness, where the seats held their own counsel. "Hastings, we are close now to the place where motives touch. Money, pride, fear, ambition. There are relationships we have not yet named. They will come. For now, we watch on. We let the mind that needs to finish its scene lead us forward." As if in answer, a soft thump echoed from the direction of the upper boxes, the sound of a door, perhaps, closing with care. Harrow started. Pike barked an order. Poirot only smiled, grave and certain. "Voila," he murmured. "Our composer cannot live without his echo. We will follow, but not too fast." And under the pall of the bleeding curtain, with smoke still clinging politely to the corridors and the scent of lavender a thin ribbon through it all, the Belvedere settled into the brittle stillness of an orchestra between movements, every player staring at the conductor's hand to see when next it would fall. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. The sound from the upper box had left the air taut, like the drawn string of a bow. Inspector Harrow dispatched constables up the side stair, their boots thudding into the shadows above. Poirot, however, made no move to follow. He remained at the center of the stage, head slightly inclined, as though listening to something subtler than footsteps. "You will not go up?" I asked, surprised. "Nan, Hastings," he murmured. "When a fish rises to the bait, we do not leap into the river, we let the line play." Harrow, already halfway to the proscenium, threw him a glance edged with impatience. "If you're suggesting we ignore—" "I suggest," Poirot interrupted, that we do not frighten our composer into silence. He has more notes to play." The constables returned a few minutes later, reporting only a door ajar in the north gallery, and the faint trace of lavender in the air. No person, no sign of haste, just absence where there should have been nothing at all. "That is enough," Poirot said quietly, as if pleased. "We have now a path that runs above us, as well as the one before us. A criminal who walks in both will leave prints in each." Harrow exhaled sharply, clearly unconvinced, but Poirot had already turned back to the cluster of suspects. His gaze rested briefly on each in turn, and I could see the calculation behind his eyes. Something had shifted. His questions would now draw not only from what they had done tonight, but from the web that bound them together long before the curtain bled. "Monsieur Vale," Poirot began, "a little while ago you spoke of Sir Geoffrey's wish to change the ending of your play. You resisted. Tell me, how long have you known him?" Vale glanced up from the script, he still clutched like a talisman. 3 years. He first approached me after my last production, said he admired my ear for dialogue, but the melancholy finish had costed a long run. He offered to invest in my next project on the understanding he could advise. "And you accepted?" Vale's mouth twisted. "I accepted the money, yes. I thought I could ignore the advice. I was wrong." Poirot's voice softened, almost sympathetic. "And if you refused both advice and alteration, you feared losing the investment?" "Yes," Vale admitted. "Without it, the Belvedere would not have staged the Ashen Hour at all." Cattermole gave a faint growl. "Not true, we'd have found another play." "You'd have found another failure," Vale shot back, surprising me with the sudden steel in his tone. Sir Geoffrey liked to gamble on risky work, but only so long as he could put his thumb on the scales. "Messieurs," Poirot intervened smoothly, "we will not rehearse Act 2 of your quarrel here. But note this, Hastings. Already we see how money links the manager to the author, and both to the patron. Such chains, they can bind in more than one way." He turned to Miss Lane. "And you, Madame, your history with Sir Geoffrey we know." He questioned. "Your casting. Did you know him before this production?" Her smile was thin. "I knew him in passing at receptions, charity galas. He was the sort of man who asked how one was, and did not listen to the answer. When he became an investor here, he made himself a fixture. After the first read-through, he suggested I was past my prime for such a romantic lead. I told him the role required skill, not youth, and he replied that the public preferred its heroines wrapped in freshness. I imagine he wanted a prettier name on the poster to improve box office returns." "And did you fear he might succeed in replacing you?" "I knew he could, if he pushed hard enough. But I've survived worse storms. I don't kill my critics, Poirot, I outlast them." Poirot inclined his head, but I noticed his gaze drift briefly to her hands. They were clasped tightly, knuckles pale under the powder. Next, he addressed Miss Drake, the wardrobe mistress. "Mademoiselle, you keep order in what others would let fall into chaos. Sir Geoffrey, did he interfere in your domain also?" "He interfered everywhere," Drake said shortly. 2 weeks ago he criticized the cost of the gowns, said they should be altered to use less fabric. I told him actors don't breathe in calico. He laughed and said perhaps it was time to find someone more economical. "I've worked here 15 years, Monsieur Poirot. This is my theatre as much as his, and your loyalty is to it, above all." "To the theatre?" "Yes. Not to its owners, not to its patrons. Buildings survive people. That's why I care for the costumes as if they were children. They'll outlast all of us." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Even the people who wear them, especially them," she said, and turned away. From there his attention shifted to Julius North. "Monsieur North, you have already told us Sir Geoffrey insulted you, but you are not without ambition yourself. In a different production, with a different investor, would your path to the lead have been clearer?" North leaned back, his chair tilting dangerously. "Maybe, or maybe he'd have backed me if I'd flattered him enough. Trouble is, I'm no good at bowing and scraping. I've seen men get their break by keeping their mouths shut, and their backs bent. I'm not one of them." "So you see him as an obstacle?" Poirot suggested. "I saw him as temporary," North said simply. "Men like him always get bored, and move on. If he hadn't died, he'd have lost interest in the play by Christmas." Lady Aurelia, who had been silent, now spoke with that deliberate clarity she seemed to reserve for when she wished her words to carry. "Gentlemen, you speak as though Sir Geoffrey's death were the end of your troubles. In truth, it will make them worse. His estate will not forgive debts. His absence will not soften old grudges, and whoever killed him has made certain the rest of you will be looking over your shoulders for the rest of your careers." Her gaze swept them with an almost regal detachment, but I thought I saw the faintest glimmer of challenge in her eyes. Poirot, too, noticed. "Madame," he said, "you speak as though you understand the killer's mind." "I understand human nature," she replied. "Ambition, fear, resentment, they all share the same face under the mask, and you believe all of those are present here." She gave the faintest of smiles. "Do you not?" For a moment, no one answered. Then Harrow, with a pointed cough, said, "This is all very interesting, but I've yet to see anything that moves us beyond suspicion and gossip. If you've found your chain of connections, Poirot, perhaps you'd care to name the link that broke." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "The chain is intact, Inspector. It is the lock it fits that I am studying. Somewhere among these connections, debts, threats, ambitions, there is one bond stronger than the rest. It is not enough to know who disliked Sir Geoffrey. I must know who needed him silent." "And you think tonight's theatrics are meant to hide that?" Harrow asked. "I think," Poirot said, "that they are meant to distract us while that silence is put to other uses." A voice from the far side of the stage interrupted the brown-haired usher again, breathless. "Inspector, there's been another note posted on the announcement board." We crossed to it at once. Beneath the neatly straightened line Poirot had adjusted earlier was now pinned a single sheet of paper, folded once. Harrow unfolded it. Inside, written in that same strong, impatient hand, were the words, "Act 3 will bring its own ending." A shiver moved through the assembled company. Poirot studied the note for a long moment, then looked up, his eyes bright. "Voilà Hastings. The composer has promised us the finale. All we must do is ensure we are in the right seat when the curtain falls." The theatre seemed to hold its breath. Whatever bound these people together before, it was now clear they were being kept together for one purpose, and the next act had already begun writing itself. Chapter 10. Poirot's Secret Clue. Harrow read the message twice, as though the second reading might produce a signature. "Act 3 will bring its own ending," he repeated, flatly. "I don't like threats that think they're poetry." "It is not poetry, Inspector," Poirot said, his head tipped to one side. "It is timing, and timing is more dangerous than rhyme." He did not touch the paper. He looked. His gaze travelled, not upon the words, but upon what framed them. The wooden lip of the announcement board. The tiny crescent scratches where pins had been worked in and out over the years. A new puncture, bright in the wood. And just beneath, the fold of the note, a faint dusting of something pale that the eye would have mistaken for ordinary stage fluff, if the eye had not been "Hastings," he murmured, so low that only I heard. "You remember the little grains, the sand from the sachet, voila again, and something else." He leaned closer. "Do you see? This pin." He indicated the fastener holding the note. It was not the broad brass tack that had held the night's official notices. A narrow steel pin fixed the paper. Its head, a tiny opaline bead, a dressmaker's pin, not a thumbtack. Very tidy, very light. "Miss Drake's realm," I whispered. "Or anyone who raided it," he breathed. He drew back, his eyes alight. The way they are when a child finds a shell that does not match the beach. And the fold. Hastings looked at the crease, not the pocket fold of the gentleman, not the trifold of the usher who must slide a program into the apron. This is the bookfolder habit of those who keep pages in a script, lengthwise, so that the spine does not fight the paper. A person of the theatre, yes, but which one? Harrow's pencil was already at work. "We'll have samples of everyone's scribble," he said. "Lane, Vale, Pike, Catamol, North, Drake, each of you write that sentence exactly as it appears. We'll compare hands." Poirot smiled faintly. "Handwriting, Inspector, is the peacock's tail displayed to deceive. It changes with fear, with pride, with a wish to look like another. I do not despise it. I simply do not marry it in haste." "Then what will you marry?" Harrow demanded. "A little thing," Poirot said lightly, and with that unhelpful gaiety. He moved away from the board and began to stroll the stage, apparently with no purpose at all. In truth, I knew there was nothing purposeless in him. He stopped by the cue desk and rested two fingertips upon the pencil there, rolled it just once and looked at the graphite line it left on his glove. He lifted his hand to his nose. "Black lead and rosin," he murmured. "Mr. Pike, your pencil is rosin-dressed, to keep it from slipping." Pike shot him a look that was almost grudgingly respectful. Old tricks," Poirot said. "Advertise old habits." Habits are worth more than signatures. He moved again, to the rope with its slight sheen, to the scratch in the proscenium paint. At each point he paused, just long enough for some interior ledger to record anew what it had already noted, and to add, perhaps, the small detail that changes a sum from nearly right to exact. "Now," he said at last, turning back to the company, "we will do a thing that is very simple, and yet very cruel. We will rehearse." Cattermole recoiled. "Rehearse what?" "Act 3, Poirot said pleasantly. "What else?" "Our composer has promised us a finale. We will supply the orchestra and see whether the conductor conducts." Harrow's eyes narrowed. "You mean to set a trap?" "I mean to lay out the floor," Poirot said, "exactly as it will be when the mind that needs symmetry cannot restrain itself." He spoke with the quiet assurance of a man arranging cutlery. "Mr. Pike, your crew will reset the Act 3 scene precisely. Miss Drake, you will lay your prop table as if for a performance, but the paper knife, which is missing, will be replaced with a twin from the property staudled, labelled beneath with chalk, and watched by a constable who yawns convincingly. Mr. Cattermole, you will have the electrician repair our house lamps, so that, at my sign, there comes a dip no more than a blink. The doors remain watched, no one leaves." And he faced Harrow. "We will conduct the simplest of exercises. Each principal will take their place and speak 3 lines from the top of the act." "This is madness," Vale protested, clutching his script. "You can't under these circumstances. You are a dramatist." "Monsieur Vale," Poirot said, courteous as a surgeon, "you know that when the moment is prepared, the scene runs itself. We will make the moment. The person who cannot resist will reveal whether they reach for the rope, the board, the knife, or the window." "What window?" Cattermole cried, flustered. "The manager's office window," Poirot said cheerfully, "where the little breeze of lavender has been. Inspector, you will have a man in the alley below, ready to see whether a hand appears where it should not." Harrow considered, then nodded curtly. "Do it, quickly." There was, for the next 10 minutes, the bustle of a theatre knitting itself into readiness, the fast, quiet competence of Pike's crew, the severe economical movements of Drake as she laid out the letters, spectacles, blotter, inkwell, duplicate knife in its leather sleeve with chalk ghost beneath. A constable, burly and bored by profession, took up his lean near the table and adopted a monumental yawn upon instruction. In the wings, the brown-haired usher flitted, pinning back a drapier, removing an abandoned shawl there. She met my glance and looked away, flushed. "End place." "Miss Amos," Poirot said, softly clapping his hands. "Miss Lane, here. Monsieur Vale, at the desk. Mr. North, right. Mr. Pike, your cue book. Mr. Cattermole, as a manager watches standing where managers stand when they wish to be seen. Miss Drake, downstage, so that you may protect the order you love. Lady Aurelie, if you would be so kind as to observe from the box where we first sat." He turned to Ellisbourg. Ellis, pale and shaken, the constable a shadow at his elbow. "You will remain where all can see you. It is unjust. It is necessary." They arranged themselves with the truth only such drills produce. Each went by instinct, to the inch he would have claimed on any ordinary night, and I saw Poirot's eyes count those inches. He came to stand beside me, small and composed, a general satisfied with his map. "Inspector," he said, "on my word, blink the house." Harrow lifted a hand. The electrician, somewhere in the flies, worked his little magic. The theatre narrowed into itself, a soft contraction of lightened there. In that tiniest of darknesses, the stage became again a mind's private room. In the half-glow that followed, 3 things happened almost together. First, Mr. Pike's rosin-black pencil rolled, ever so slightly, and reflex, older than thought, his left hand shot out to catch it before it fell. His right stayed on the cue book. The left, I noted, left a sharp, neat dot of graphite where it touched the margin. He did not notice he had done it. Second, somewhere near the announcement board, a minute click sounded the sound a narrow pin makes when it kisses wood. Miss Drake's head turned fox-quick to the sound that violates the order of her table, and, catching herself, she looked hard at the board instead. The open lin-headed pin on the new note trembled very slightly in the still air, and then was still. Third, on the prop table, the leather sleeve for the replacement knife shifted not at all, but I saw, with that heightening of the senses that fear brings, that a gloved hand which had been nowhere near it when the light dipped was now a handspan closer. The hand belonged to Julius North. He saw me looking and smiled. The smile was wrong. It arrived a fraction too early. Mercy, Poirot said, quite softly. Again, we ran it twice more. Each time the house blinked. Each time the same reflexes blossomed. Pike's left hand to the pencil. A whisper of pintip on wood. The tiniest adjustment of distance near the leather sleeve. The subtlest tilt of a head toward the manager's corridor, as if the air itself hummed there. And with each repetition, Poirot's eyes filled, like ink, creeping across blotting paper, with meaning he did not share. At last he lifted a palm. Enough. We have learned what can be learned without forcing the confession. He smiled at the company, all strained charm and lemon sweetness. You have been admirable. Now we rest for a very little time. Harrow, jaw tight, muttered, if you've seen something, Poirot, say it. I have seen, Poirot replied, a mind impatient one, that cannot bear a crooked line, and so straightens it. That cannot resist the click of the pin, that must catch a rolling pencil with the hand that has always done so. That moves nearer to his sleeve, because it admitted a twin to its pocket earlier. That breathes toward a corridor where lavender travels. He lifted one shoulder, but I will not say it yet. If I name the player before the overture, the music stops. I would prefer it to play 5 minutes longer. You want them to try. Again, Harrow said, grim. I want, Poirot said gently, the truth to finish writing itself. 1 more page, perhaps 2. He touched my sleeve. Walk with me, Hastings. We strolled, apparently idly, to the wing where the shadows pool. In that privacy he let out the breath he had been keeping, and for a moment I saw the gravity under the charm. The little clue, mon ami, he said, almost tenderly. It is, so small one could mistake it for a pearl's pale glint. One does not pin notices with such pins unless one is the person who lives with them every hour, or the person who wishes us to think so and has stolen them. But there is something the imitator does not remember, the angle of the hand that pins. See the tilt. It is the angle of a left-handed worker pinning up and to the right. A right-hander, reaching from the same position, would not make that hole, that way. And there is more, but that remains for me. You saw who did it, I breathed. I saw how they cannot help doing it, he corrected. That is more reliable than who. For now, hush. He glanced back at the company, where nerves had become a new kind of silence. We have set our stage. In the next minutes the tensions will run like wires between them. When wires hum, Hastings, you hear the tune. He straightened, the familiar lightness returning to his voice. Inspector Harrow, you will indulge me in one eccentricity. No one goes to the announcement board unless I give permission. No one approaches the prop table but Miss Drakehand. She will announce herself as she does so. Mr. Pike will continue to mind his pencil with either hand, as he pleases. His eyes flickered, amused, to Pike's uncomprehending scowl. Lady Aurelia will remain where she becomes the chorus present, judging, silent. And you? Harrow demanded. Poirot said, will wait for the note that the murderer cannot resist writing, the one not on paper. He tapped his temple. Here. He moved back into the light, and, with a small, courtly bow to the assembled company, announced in a tone almost festive, Mise Amos, the interval is over. We proceed. Tranquillement, do not be alarmed. Be exact. The orchestra, if I may keep the metaphor, lifted its instruments, and in the charged hush that followed, while the scent of lavender drifted like a ribbon no hand could quite catch, I understood that Poirot had found the detail that would break the case open. Only he chose to keep it where it could not be tampered with, behind his eyes, where the little grey cells turned it, polished it, and waited for the precise moment to show it to the world. Chapter 11. Tensions rise. If the Belvedere had felt tense before, now it was like a room where every object was balanced on edge, waiting for the smallest nudge to send it toppling. No one had left, no one could leave, yet the enforced stillness seemed only to make each person more restless. A strange theatre within the theatre had formed no script, but every movement scrutinized, every glance carrying weight. Poirot had positioned himself in a low velvet chair near the center of the stage, not so much to command the space as to be unavoidable in it. Harrow took up a vantage point near the prompt corner, notebook in hand, though his pencil rarely moved. The constables at each exit stood like sentinels of a fortress under siege. Miss Lane was the first to break the hush. She crossed to the wing with long, measured steps, retrieved a shawl from a peg, and wrapped it around her shoulders. Draughty, she murmured, though her eyes slid just for an instant toward Julius North. North caught the glance, returned it with a half-smile, and leaned back in his chair with deliberate nonchalance. "Some of us find the temperature tolerable," he said. "You would," Miss Lane replied. Her tone was light, but the words had an edge. Vale shifted in his seat, near the desk, clearly uncomfortable in the role of spectator. His fingers worked at a fold in his script until the page showed a pale crease like a scar. "This is absurd," he muttered. "We're not school children to be kept in after lessons." "On the contrary," Poirot said gently, "school children learn much in detention about themselves, about their companions." His eyes moved to Vale's restless hands, "and sometimes about who borrows whose habits." Vale frowned but said nothing. From the wardrobe table, Miss Drake continued her meticulous arrangement of props. She was not a woman to fidget, but tonight she touched and retouched each item with a precision that bordered on ritual. The duplicate paper knife lay exactly where it should, yet her gaze lingered on it, as though measuring the air around it. "Miss Drake," Poirot said conversationally, "is it difficult to keep such order in a company like this?" "It's impossible," she replied, without looking up, "but I do it anyway." "And what happens," Poirot asked softly, "when someone disturbs that order?" Her needle paused over an invisible stitch in the air. "I notice," she said simply. Catamol, who had been pacing near the curtain, rounded on Poirot with a sudden flare of irritation. "If you're trying to frighten us into turning on each other, you're wasting your time. We've all had enough. Let the inspector make his arrest and be done." Poirot smiled. "Ah, but done is such a final word, Monsieur Catamol. And this is not yet finished." Lady Aurelia, seated once more in her high-backed chair, spoke without shifting her gaze from Poirot. "You believe the killer will act again, don't you?" "I believe," Poirot said, "that a person who has composed the first two acts cannot bear to leave the play unfinished. And so, madame, we wait for the third." The silence that followed was broken by a small but telling sound, the faint tick tick of metal against wood. All eyes turned toward the announcement board. The openly headed pin trembled slightly, catching the light. Miss Drake's head came up at once. "Who touched that?" No one answered. The constable nearest the board swore under his breath and stepped closer, but the paper still bore the same threatening message, folded as before. Only the angle of the pin had shifted, no longer quite square. "Not the killer," Harrow said, frowning, "just nerves." Poirot did not rise. "Nan, Inspector, nerves make the hand shake, not the pin turn. This was adjustment, not accident." His gaze swept the group. Several faces avoided it. A person cannot resist tidying their own work or ensuring it is displayed to best effect. The tension ratcheted a notch higher. Conversations broke into little skirmishes, Vale snapping at North over a half-heard remark, Miss Lane chiding Catamol for his pacing, Miss Drake rebuking Ellis for standing too close to the table. The young stagehand, cheeks blazing, stammered that he had only been sent for a glass of water. "And by whom?" Poirot asked. Ellis hesitated. "Mr. North, sir." North raised his hands in mock surrender. "What?" The boy looked pale. "I thought he could use it." "Ah," Poirot said softly. "Always the kindness is so useful when they move people from one place to another." Harrow's eyes narrowed. "Are you accusing?" "I accuse nothing," Poirot interrupted. "I observe." Another silence fell, this one heavier than the last. It was Lady Aurelia who finally broke it. "This cannot last much longer. Someone will snap." "That," Madame Poirot said, "is the point." Almost on cue, a sudden sharp noise cracked the error drawer in the cue desk, slammed shut with unnecessary force. All heads turned toward Mr. Pike, who stood rigid, his jaw set. "Mislaid my pencil," he said tersely. "Again?" Poirot asked, his tone mild. Pike's eyes flickered, just once, to the stage left rope, before he replied, "It rolls." Poirot's smile was almost imperceptible. "Yes, Monsieur Pike, it does." And in that moment, I understood, though only dimly, that Poirot's waiting game was no longer simply about catching someone in the act. He was watching for the way they moved, the reflexes they could not suppress, the lines of connection that stretched invisible across the stage. Every shift in position, every small adjustment, was tightening those lines. The orchestra of suspicion was tuning for its final movement, and I had the uneasy sense that when Poirot finally raised his baton, the music would be both brief and devastating. Chapter 12. The confrontation. Poirot did not pounce. He rarely does. He let the tension do its work first, as a violinist draws a long bow to make the string sing of its own accord. When the murmurs had thinned to the hush of held breath, he rose from the velvet chair and moved not toward the blood-dark curtain or the accusing announcement board, but to the exact middle of the stage, where all the sightlines met. Amos, he said softly, we have rehearsed the movements. Now we rehearse the minds. He turned a slow circle, including each of them in a look that was courteous, almost grateful. You have all told me what you did. Now tell me what you knew, for you had any right to know it. Another riddle, Catamol groaned. Very little one, Poirot said, unoffended. We begin with something simple. The manager's office window. When Inspector Harrow posted a man in the alley, he saw nothing. No hand thrust out, no falling scrap. Why? It's a ridiculous question, Pike said, clipped, because no one leaned out. Perhaps, Poirot allowed, or because, if one did, the alley watch could not see. There is a small architectural trick, Monsieur Catamol. Catamol blinked. Trick. The lip of the external lintel, Poirot said lightly. It projects just enough to blind the alley from a person who leans only a little. A careful person. One who has looked from that window before and learned its kindness. I don't, Catamol began, baffled. From the wings, Mr. Pike's voice cut in, impatient. Anyone could guess that. There's a fire stair and a brick return. You can't get a direct angle unless you hang out like a fool. Poirot's head turned with infinite slowness. You speak exactly, Monsieur Pike. Fire stair, brick return, direct angle. These are the words of a man who has tested the view, not guessed it. Color rose above Pike's collar. He folded his arms. A barricade. I am the stage director. I test everything. Sightlines are my work. If the manager's box sticks its nose where it shouldn't, I know about it. Poirot said, as if conceding a point. We proceed. A second little thing. The pin that holds our threatening. Note delicate, with an opaline head. Not a thumbtack, not a nail. A dressmaker's pin. Chosen for neatness, for invisibility. Who among you was quickest to adjust it when the house blinked? Miss Drake drew herself up, grey eyes hard. You are looking at me. Yes, I heard the click, and I turned, because pins belong to me. Precisely, Poirot said, with warmth. They belong to you in habit, in ownership. You guard their order. But you did not touch the pin. He pivoted, lightly as a dancer. Who did? No hand is seen, and yet he pointed to the board's moulding. At the lower right, a new bruise on the varnish left of where a right-hander would steady the frame, and at the height of a man who does not stoop. You cannot deduce a killer from a smudge, Harrow muttered. Nan Poirot agreed, serenely. But you may deduce a reflex, and murders are full of reflexes. He let the sentence linger, then shifted to a tone almost conversational. Monsieur Vale, in your satchel, the coil of string for counting breaths. You tie your scenes in your head. You count seconds. You have no need of false notices to shorten a cue. And yet someone wrote a false notice with a hand that bruises. The paper, impatient, whose impatience loves exactness more than art. Vale's gaze slid, unhappy, toward Pike. The director's mouth thinned. Miss Lane, Poirot said gently. Rouge was on Mr. Catamol's desk drawer. You pass within reach of rouge and powder daily. But rouge is a democrat. It settles. On faces, on handkerchiefs, on the collars of men who brush the curtains of women in passing. It speaks of proximity, not guilt. The actress held his gaze without blinking. Proximity is the business of a theatre, she said. Half of us are within arm's length of someone we dislike at any given moment. Ah, but which someone? Poirot murmured, and for a moment I thought he would press her. He did not. He turned instead to Julius North, who lounged with deliberate carelessness. His chair tilted back on its rear legs. Monsieur North, your habit is to move people with kindness. You send the boy for water. You reclaim your cloak. You charm. A useful habit, if you wish to place things. A watch, a sachet, a knife sleeve. Yet the world is full of charming men. And the scent on your cloak, he lifted a finger, belongs as easily to patrons as to your person. For now, I say only this. You move nearer when the light blinks. Not to take, but to test whether we watch. North's smile held. And do you? Always, Poirot said, and the smile cooled. He let that go too, and I saw what he was doing, tasting, never biting until the whole company, like a herd that has long heard a predator but not seen him, had edged itself into one tense knot. Now, he said, and his voice was silk drawn over steel. "We come to the thing of timing. Inspector, be so good as to recall the watch." Harrow produced Sir Geoffrey's hunter case from his pocket. Its enamel face, a dull moon. "Stopped at 8:42, he said. "The cue for the swell," Pike put in, crisp. "I told you," Poirot said, mild. "You told us at once." Before the thought had finished falling from the air, Pike snorted. "Any man in this house knows the swell hits at 42. It's been the same since first cues." "A manager does not," Poirot said. "A patron does not. A wardrobe mistress cares for hymns. An author hears his dialogue, not the orchestra's gout. The leading lady is on stage. She feels the swell. She does not count it. A stagehand knows his lamp, his rope butt, the left-handed man at the cue desk." Poirot's head tilted. "He knows to the second. He lives by the second." Pike's laugh was short. "You're building a palace out of matchsticks. Then let us bring a little wind." Poirot stepped, as if idly, to the cue desk. "A small experiment. Mr. Pike, will you indulge me? When your pencil rolls, which hand catches it?" Pike's jaw bunched. "I don't." Poirot, without warning, set the rosin-dressed pencil moving. Pike's left hand flashed. It stopped. The roll with the neatness of a metronome. A tiny dot bloomed on the margin. "Reflex," repeated. Silence tightened like a wire. It was Miss Lane who cracked first. "He could have killed him," she said, low. "He hates interference. He hates being watched." Pike rounded on her. "And you love a critic. He was going to throw you over, for a child with bright teeth, and you were going to obey him." She flung back. "Cut the act. Trim the scene. Spoil Vale's ending because it was long." Pike snapped, and then the mistake leaped from him. A spark thrown from the wheel, because he demanded I pull the curtain 2 minutes early and wait the stage left fall so the stain would read from the back stalls. The sentence broke. His mouth shut on the rest like a trap. Every head turned. Even the dust seemed to pause in the air. Poirot's voice, when it came, was gentle, almost pitying. "You have said more than you meant to, mon ami. Wait the stage left fall. That is the language of the man who arranged the sachet, who carried lavender sand because lead shot takes time. And 2 minutes early you have repeated the lie you wrote on the board to move the moment, not because the play required it, but because your composition did." Pike's face had gone the color of wet paper. He insisted. Sir Geoffrey insisted on many things," Poirot said, unmoved. "But he could not insist on the angle of a pin, on the grease, on a rope, on a scratch at exactly the height of a man who reaches with his left hand. He could not insist that a director who lives by cues would enjoy the perfection of a bleeding curtain on the exact beat the orchestra swells." Harrow took a step forward. "Pike, you'll come quietly." The director backed a pace, eyes hot, breath quick. For an instant I thought he would bolt for the alley, for the box, for any door that was not watched. He mastered it. "You think this proves murder?" he said hoarsely. "I set a moment, yes. I made a scene. I do that every night. But I didn't stab him." "Perhaps not," Poirot said. And in the tiny delay before his next words I heard him place a card on some private table. "Perhaps you did not put in the blade. Or perhaps you did, with a tool that looks harmless, in a hand that knows how to be exact. We will know in a very few minutes. But already you have told me the thing I needed, that you and Sir Geoffrey spoke the same technical language tonight. In Act 2, in the passage where Miss Lane heard the argument, he said 2 minutes. You carried it to the board," he said. "Stage left fall. You had the weight ready. You adjusted the rope so grease would take no print. You told Ellis to trim the lamp so he would find a body and give you a witness who looks like guilt." Pike's voice dropped to a furious whisper. "He would have ruined the show. All of it. Months of work, and he'd have clapped his hands, and made me butcher it for his vanity. And so," Poirot said, sorrow ironing his tone flat, "you wrote him into your performance." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then a small sound came from the prompt corner, the brown-haired usher, hand to her mouth. Pike's head jerked toward it. The instinct to shut mouths, to still witnesses, to fix eyes saw it stampede across his face. Poirot saw it too. His hand rose without looking. "Inspector," he said, "if you please." Harrow's men closed in, not roughly, but with finality. The director did not fight. He stood, rigid, while the cuffs bit, and if there was defiance in him still, it was the brittle kind that cracks cleanly. Poirot did not crow. He only let out that very small breath one releases when a sum that has teased the mind finally resolves. to a neat figure. "We are not finished," he said, to Harrow and to the room. "But we have reached the moment when a man tells us what he should not have known, that Hastings is always Act Three's opening chord." He looked not at Pike, then, but beyond him to the crimson curtain, to the note on the board, to the ally-lipped window where lavender drifted down invisible. "There remains," he added, with quiet certainty, "a hand that placed the blade, and a reason older than pride. We will have both before the curtain truly falls." Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape Pike had been led away to the small office beside the stage that Harrow was using as a temporary holding space. The rest of the company had not been dismissed, and Poirot made no move to suggest they should be. If anything, he seemed content to let them simmer trapped in one another's company, circling their own thoughts like wary cats. The brown-haired usher, who had gasped when Pike was accused, now sat on a low stool near the wings, staring down at her clasped hands. Miss Drake busied herself needlessly with the prop table, aligning the inkwell, smoothing a fold in the blotter, straightening the duplicate knife as if to remind everyone it was still there. Lady Aurelia, statuesque in her chair, observed them all with that measured stillness that could be mistaken for detachment, though I suspected she missed very little. Poirot, pacing in a slow figure-eight across the stage, seemed to be thinking, aloud in fragments, the rope, the grease, the scratch, and the watch. His moustaches twitched in the dim light. "But the blade is another matter." Harrow approached him. "If Pike greased the rope and planted the note, that's one thing. But if you're saying he didn't stick the knife in, then who did? And why use Pike's theatrics to do it?" "Because," Poirot said, lowering his voice, "the perfect place to hide your own crime is inside another man's performance. If the audience is already watching the stage for the fall of the curtain, they will not see the hand in the shadows." Before Harrow could respond, a constable hurried in from the alley, his cap askew. "Inspector Pike's gone." The words struck like a crack of wood. "What do you mean, gone?" Harrow barked. "Slipped out the side door by the fire stair. I was on the alley watch, saw him halfway down the ladder before I realized he'd somehow got the door open. He's fast." Harrow swore and turned to bark orders, but Poirot's voice cut across his. "Nan, Inspector, do not chase him." Harrow swung round, his bolting. "He is running." "Yes," Poirot agreed, mildly, "but not away from us towards something. If you follow too soon, you frighten the bird before it shows its nesting place." Harrow hesitated, torn between procedure and Poirot's uncanny certainty. "You're gambling. He'll lead us to proof." "I am not a gambler, Inspector," Poirot said with a little shrug. "I am a man who lets a mouse find its own trap." The theatre held its breath in the long seconds that followed. Somewhere, in the walls, the heating pipes ticked softly. Then, faint and echoing, came a muffled clatter from the gallery level above the stage, followed by the distinct thump of a window sash. "This way," Poirot said at once, moving with surprising speed toward the side stair. Harrow and I followed, two constables close behind. The narrow wooden steps creaked underfoot, and as we climbed, the cold breath of the open window met us in the half-dark of the gallery corridor. We found Pike not fleeing into the street, but crouched over a battered tin trunk pushed up against the wall beneath the window. He was working at the lock with a short, thin blade that glinted in the weak light, a blade that, even at a glance, was no prop. Harrow's voice boomed, "Drop it, Pike." Pike spun, startled, and for an instant looked as if he might resist, but the sight of two constables behind us killed the thought. The blade clattered to the floor. Poirot, stepping forward, nudged it with the toe of his shoe. "A narrow knife," he murmured, "long enough to reach the heart, thin enough to leave a discreet wound. And with the weight, the balancer, mon ami, you have used this before." "It's mine," Pike said through his teeth. "I keep it here for F4 repairs." "4 repairs," Poirot repeated softly, his eyes moving to the trunk. "And what repair did you hope to make in this locked box, at such a moment?" Pike said nothing. Harrow gestured to the constables, and one of them broke the rusty padlock. Inside, under a jumble of stage cloths and a coil of rope, lay a folded garment black, lined with blue silk. "The understudy's cloak," I said. Poirot bent to lift it, holding it delicately by the shoulders. The lining bore a patch, clumsily sewn, exactly where Ellis had said he'd repaired a tear. And yet, Poirot said, beneath the patch, a faint brown shadow, invisible unless you look for it in the light. Not rust, not dust, but the ghost of a stain. He replaced the cloak in the trunk, straightened, and looked Pike full in the face. You hid it here, yes. Not because you feared we would think you had killed Sir Geoffrey. You had already wrapped yourself in the comfort of your theatric spot, because you feared we would know you had helped someone else to do it. I told you, Pike began. You told me much, Poirot interrupted, but not the truth. You arranged the scene, you weighted the curtain, you set the timing, but the blade in the ribs, that was not your hand. The question is, whose was it? And to answer, I think, we must ask who was close enough to Sir Geoffrey in those seconds before the fall. Close enough to speak, perhaps to argue, and to slip a knife between the words. His gaze moved past Pike, down the dim corridor, where the rest of the company waited. I followed it, and found Lady Aurelia's face among them, serene, unreadable, her eyes fixed not on Pike, but on Poirot. Harrow ordered Pike taken back into custody. As they led him away, Poirot lingered by the open window, looking out into the alley. A simple ladder, he murmured, up or down. It is a short journey. One could pass an object here, unseen from the stage. A cloak, for example, or a knife. He turned back, his eyes alive with thought. Inspector, bring everyone to the stage. I believe our third act is ready to begin. The curtain will rise sooner than our composer planned. We descended to find the company gathered once more under the watch of the constables, the crimson curtain looming behind them like a witness that would not speak. The sense of waiting was almost unbearable. Poirot, standing before them, spoke in a voice so calm it was almost kind. There will be no more running, he said. No more planting of notes, or shifting of pins, or hiding of cloaks. The game of shadows is over. Now we will have the truth in full light. And with that, he began to call them forward, one by one, as though for a final bow, though I knew, from the steel beneath his tone, that this was no bow, but the line-up before the revelation. Chapter 14. The final piece. Falls into place. Poirot did not storm so much as arrange. He had the constables shift to chairs to face the footlights, set the prop table square with the stage edge, and asked that the house be brought to a cool, unwavering glow. The belvedere, scrubbed of its blinking tricks, took on the clarity of a drawing-room laid for cards. No shadows, no excuses. Maintenant, he said softly. We speak each to his own truth. He beckoned the brown-haired usher first. She came timidly, hands knotted in the hem of her apron, and perched on the chair as though it might reject her. Your name, mademoiselle? Kitty Barnes. Sir, Bon Mademoiselle Barnes, who sent you with the note for the announcement board. Her eyes sprang wide. No one, sir. I found it on the cue desk, folded like that. Mr. Pike had stepped away. It said to pin it without delay, and she swallowed. It looked official. I thought I was helping. Who told you without delay? Poirot asked, mild as warm milk. It was written there, those exact words. She hesitated, and the handwriting looked like the posted notices, blocky. I am not clever with reading hands, sir, nor need you be. Poirot's smile was kind. You pinned it with a dressmaker's pin because... She flushed. Because the brass tacks were gone from the saucer. I keep pins in my apron. Miss Drake makes us carry two. It was habit. Merci, mademoiselle. You have helped more than you know. He gestured her back and turned to Miss Drake. You keep your pins in saucers. In magnet dishes, Drake corrected automatically. They do not roll. And this evening, the tacks for the board vanished at a convenient moment. Poirot mused, taken by the person who wished the pin to speak of you. Her mouth compressed. Theatre men think needle means woman, she said, dryly, but a board is not hem, and I did not go near it. Just so, Poirot said, satisfied by the flash of temper. A liar's anger tastes different. He pivoted, swift as a rook changing file. M. Vale. The playwright rose like a man roused from a long, unhappy dream, and took the remaining chair, script still clutched. Your string. Your counting, tell me something exact, Poirot said. At what line does the swell begin? Vale blinked, then answered from habit, at, I would choose the ash before the hour. The third beat of the reply. Exact, Poirot murmured. And when the swell comes early, what happens to your scene? It dies, Vale said simply. The line breaks. The audience feels cheated without knowing why. You would rather burn the theatre than botch a beat, Poirot said, not unkindly. Vale's mouth twisted. Tonight, the theatre burned and the beat was botched. Not by your hand, Poirot said, releasing him. You are the man who suffers the ruin, not crafts it. He called Miss Verity Lane next. She did not sit so much as take possession of the chair, spine high, chin level. Madame Poirot said, "You heard Sir Geoffrey arguing in the second act. Did you recognize the other voice?" A pause, frank and measuring. "Pike," she said at last. It had that clipped rhythm, like cues being counted. "I was not sure until you put the rope and the timing to him. Then I knew. And before tonight, your financial arrangement with Sir Geoffrey," Poirot said softly. "He advanced you funds. He could call them in. He lent where banks would not," she replied evenly, "at terms that looked generous until one. Read the footnotes. He thought it bound me to compliance." Her smile was small and wintry. He misread his actress. Poirot inclined his head. "You did not need to kill him to be rid of him." "No," she said, "only to act better than he imagined. That I can do, Bean." He released her and called Julius North. The understudy came with his usual feline ease and relaxed into the chair with a slant of insolence that played well in the half-light. "Your cloak has travelled far," Monsieur Poirot said pleasantly, "from cloakroom to wardrobe, to the trunk by the window, and back by our hands. In that journey, its pocket acquired a tear, a repair, and the ghost of a stain." "Why was the pocket torn?" North's eyes flickered once, then still. "Snagged on a nail back there," he said, "a hair too quick. And the watch in Ellis's apron came by your cloak," Poirot continued. "But you did not place it there." North's smile deepened. "Then who did? You will hear in a moment. One thing more, Mon Bravewin." The house blinked. "You moved near the knife sleeve, not to test your audience, or to stretch my legs," North murmured. "Stretch them elsewhere, next time," Poirot advised, and waved him away. "Catamol," Harrow prompted, impatient. "Get to the money." "Patience," Inspector Poirot murmured. "The money is a baseline. It does not yet carry the melody." He motioned the manager forward. Catamol sat, florid face mottled, dignity slipping like a bad cough. "If you're about to drag my accounts through the footlights, only the line that leads out of the manager's office to the great," Poirot said. "Someone tried to burn Sir Geoffrey's private ledger, pages his reminders of debts and obedience. You did not do so. You have the look of a man who hides trouble under paper, not in fire." Something like hurt pride flickered. "I keep files," he muttered. "A clean book is a clean conscience, even if the figures bleed," said Mercy. He let Catamol go, and the manager retreated to the curtain's shadow. At last, Poirot turned to Lady Aurelia. He did not offer the chair. He stood before her as one bows to a hostess at the end of a dinner that has gone wrong and become interesting. "Madame Aurelia, you said you saw at once the message in the bleeding curtain. You knew Sir Geoffrey's watch. You knew his ledgers. You knew also the smell of his calantha, one that wishes to be discreet." "Why?" Her gaze did not waver. "Because he used it at meetings he wanted remembered by object, not by touch. I learned to scent a room for his presence the way one listens for a footstep behind silk. You refused both his business and his hand," Poirot said gently, and still he pressed. "He reviewed the Charities eye chair," she said. "He liked being the gate through which benevolence must pass. I told him true charity does not wear a signet ring." "You do not soften your speech, madame." "I have never learned to." "Then one last frankness," Poirot said, voice lowering. "Did you love anyone in this company?" For the first time, a faint color touched her cheek. "I do not discuss love in public." "It is not public," Poirot said. "It is only true." He let the silence test her. She met it with grace, and said nothing. "T.R.S. Bean," he murmured. "That, too, is an answer." He stepped back, changed key. "Now, Ellis." The boy approached like a summoned conscience, eyes raw. "You repaired a lining, you carried a cloak, and you found a watch. Who told you the cloak needed you, not Miss Drake?" Ellis blinked. "Mr. Pike, sir. He said Miss Drake was busy, and we were short on time." "And who asked you to fetch the lamp?" Poirot continued, "so that your discovery would be framed by the light." "Mr. Pike," Ellis whispered. "Who then sent you for water?" Poirot's tone softened. "Mr. North," Ellis said. "Miserable." Poirot nodded, as if a patient had at last repeated a diagnosis. "You were moved like a chessman, mon petit. Do not be ashamed. Even queens forget that pawns do not know the shape of the game." He dismissed the boy and turned to Harrow. "Inspector, our composition has two hands. The mise-en-scène is Pike's, he cannot deny it. But the blade belongs to someone whose grievance is not artistic, not managerial. It is intimate, old, and wrapped in silence. To find it, we follow the watch. The watch, Harrow said, baffled. We've already Nan, we have admired it. We have not listened. Lady Aurelia called it a hunter case with dark enamel, a consortium's gift, a thing he would not leave, and yet it leaves him at the moment of death, and arrives, by a cloak's pocket, in Ellis's apron. Why by the cloak? Because the wearer of that cloak had pockets no one questioned. An understudy moves freely, touches everything, is seen by no one. And why into Ellis's apron? Because the murderer, after the Blade, needed the watch to be found by a simple thief, to write the obvious story for the police. He let the logic settle. But the watch was also a key, he added softly. A key, I repeated, before I could stop myself. Not for a lock, Hastings for a meeting. Sir Geoffrey arranged them by the dial. He would say, I will see you when the enamel moon kisses the 12, and at that moment he expected the obedience of a life. There is one here who has lived by such appointments. She would know how to steal his hour without leaving a mark. Miss Lane drew breath. Miss Drake's eyes flicked. Lady Aurelia did not move. Poirot's voice became almost tender. You see why I would not chase Pike. He is the drum. The melody walks lighter. She met Sir Geoffrey just off the stage, where voices can be low and heard by none, where one can slip a narrow blade from a sleeve, because needles and knives both belong in her world, where lavender in a sachet is not an intruder but a comfort, where pins live in saucers and fold lines live in script pages, where the left hand pins up and to the right because it has always done so. Harrow stared. You're saying Drake? Poirot's eyes warmed a fraction. I am saying wardrobe is the one domain that moves through all the others without being seen. Stage, office, box, alley. But I am not yet saying who, because one more step remains. He crossed to the prop table and, with his gloved finger, drew a tiny line in the chalk ghost beneath the leather sleeve. We will ask the watch what hour it truly kept. Inspector, be so good as to send a man to Sir Geoffrey's valet. Ask when the watch was last serviced, and whether the stop at 8:42 is a truth, or a lie engineered by a thumb pressed to the train. I wager, he lifted a brow, that the watch will tell us the Blade came after the swell, not before, that the murderer wished to borrow Pike's beat to give herself an alibi. I was with the cue, with the hem, with the pin, when in truth she was with Sir Geoffrey. And you already know which she, Harrow said, half awe, half exasperation. Poirot's smile was rueful and very patient. I have everything I need, Inspector, but the theatre has taught me respect for the finale. We will gather Orland, then we will speak. He turned to the company, whose faces were as taut as strings. Mise Amos, he said, with gentle ceremony, we shall have the last act. No one leaves. 10 minutes. Take your places as if the house were full. Lady Aurelia, box. Miss Len, your wing. Miss Drake, your table. Monsieur Val, your desk. Monsieur Northnot, too near the knife. Monsieur Catamol, where managers stand to be seen. Ellis spied the lamp, only. Mr. Pike, he glanced toward the office where the director waited under guard. Our stage will do without its conductor. He looked up into the darkness beyond the footlights, where an audience would have been, and his voice dropped to that private register that convinces even the air to listen. The pattern is complete, he said. Now we will let the timing fall, and with that, he took his place at center. Hands folded, the still point about which every line in the theatre seemed to turn, waiting, not for discovery, but for the moment in which discovery becomes undeniable, for the exact second when the little grey cells, having arranged their figures, allow the curtain to rise. Chapter 15. The stage becomes the trap. The hush that settled over the Belvedere in those 10 minutes was unlike anything I had heard before. It was not the silence of an empty theatre, nor the tense pause before a curtain's rise. It was the stillness of people sitting within the shadow of accusation, each rehearsing their alibi in the quiet recesses of the mind. From the wings, I could see them take their appointed positions, as Poirot had ordered, and I had the curious impression that he was not merely placing them for convenience, but for some private geometry only he could read. Inspector Harrow moved restlessly at the back of the stalls, his boots echoing faintly on the bare boards. He muttered once or twice about circus business, but the low murmur of Poirot's voice kept him from interfering. For my part, I remained close at hand, though I confess my heart thumped rather more quickly than I liked. Poirot's arrangements had the air of a final act in which the audience does not yet realize the hero has set the trap. Lady Aurelia sat in her box, back straight, head slightly tilted, the faintest gleam from her pearls catching the stage lights. Miss Lane lingered in the wings with that feline grace of hers, watching the house as though waiting for her cue. Miss Drake busied herself at the table, the faint chink of metal and fabric telling of her preoccupation with her tools. Vale slumped at his desk, scribbling something on the corner of a script, his lips moving in silent repetition of lines. North loitered stage left, his eyes darting between Poirot and the darkened boxes. Catamol, all florid discomfort, leaned against a curtain post, as if wishing the whole affair would dissolve into thin air. Ellis stood by the lamp, a slim, uncertain figure in the warm glow, glancing toward Poirot with the nervousness of a boy who fears the master's questions. As for Mr. Pike, the director remained unseen, under the constable's watch in the office, absent, yet still casting his peculiar influence over the scene. Poirot, at the centre, surveyed them with the composure of a conductor ready to lift the baton. "Mes amis," he said at last, his voice cutting the quiet like the first note of an overture. "We shall now permit the theatre to speak in its own tongue. It has been made to lie tonight, but it will tell the truth if one knows where to stand to hear it." He stepped toward Miss Drake's table, his shoes whispering across the boards. "Observe, Inspector," he called over his shoulder, "how each person's place now matches the shape of the crime. We have the watch, the cloak, the pin, the rope, the knife, and the message. Each of these how-you-say-props belongs naturally to one or two domains, but in the crime they are cross-shifted from their rightful owners to the hands of others." Miss Drake looked up, her dark eyes sharp. "And who crossed them, Monsieur Poirot, if you know?" "Why not say, because, Madame, I wish to see how the guilty one behaves when the pattern is made visible," Poirot replied smoothly. "One does not simply accuse, one demonstrates." He moved to Ellis, standing by the lamp, and pointed to the small circle of light cast upon the stage. "Here," Poirot murmured, "was the place you stood when you found the watch in your apron. All the house could see you." "Yes, the murderer ensured this. But tell me, my child, did you notice the watch was warm?" Ellis frowned. "A bit, sir, like someone had just been holding it." Poirot's nod was almost imperceptible. "Exactement. The warmth means it had been taken from Sir Geoffrey very shortly before you found it. The killer wished it to appear as if the theft had happened earlier, but time will not lie to one who listens." Harrow shifted, interest piqued. "So that gives us the true moment of death." "Precisely," Poirot said. "And that moment comes after the swell of music proving that Mr. Pike's cue trick was not to commit the murder himself, but to create the appearance that it had happened earlier. A subtle framing of an innocent by the one who truly wielded the blade." He let that hang in the air, glancing briefly toward North. The understudy's expression was unreadable, perhaps too much so. Poirot walked toward Miss Lane in the wings. "You heard voices during the second act, Mademoiselle. One was Pike, but the other you did not admit until tonight." "Why wait to say?" Miss Lane met his gaze without flinching. "Because until I knew which way your investigation leaned, I wasn't certain the truth would serve me better than silence." "A cautious player," Poirot said softly. "But caution can also hide guilt." Her eyes narrowed. "And suspicion can make fools of clever men." Poirot merely inclined his head and moved past her to Lady Aurelia's box. He rested a gloved hand lightly upon the balustrade. "Madame, you recognized the message in the curtain at once. You saw the watch, the cologne, the debts. You had every reason to loathe Sir Geoffrey. And yet," his voice softened, almost tender, "your alibi rests on an absence, not a presence. No one saw you at the critical moment." Lady Aurelia's expression did not change. "And no one saw me with a knife, either." "Circumstance is not proof." "True," Poirot said. "But proof sometimes hides in the sequence of small acts." He turned away from her, speaking now to the whole stage. "Tonight, the sequence was broken, rearranged, so that no one noticed the empty place until it was too late. But when we put the events back in their rightful order," he stopped mid-sentence, as though catching a faint sound in the distance. Harrow straightened. "What is it?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Only the sound of a very small lie collapsing." He returned to center stage, lifting his voice so that every corner of the theatre seemed to take the words into its drapery. "In a moment, Inspector, I shall name the one who killed Sir Geoffrey. But before I do, I must show how each cloak, the watch, the knife, the pin was moved, not for use, but for story, a story the murderer wished us to read. Only by rewriting that story in its true form do we arrive at the truth. And with a gesture as deliberate as the fall of a final curtain, Poirot beckoned them all to step closer. The stage, now crowded with uneasy figures, seemed to contract around them, the house lights catching glints of sweat, the faint tremor of hands, the rigid lines of shoulders. I felt an almost physical weight pressing in, as if the theatre itself were leaning forward to witness what would be said next. Poirot looked from face to face, his eyes bright and unblinking. "It is time," he said, "to close the gap between act and reality." The words seemed to hang in the air, suspended like a held breath ready for the release that would come with the next sentence. But Poirot, with maddening composure, said nothing more. Not yet. Chapter 16. The reveal. Poirot let the silence ripen until even the footlights seemed to lean in. Then, very softly, he spoke not to one of us, but to the theatre, as if he were asking the building itself to bear witness. C.E. Sawyer, there are two crimes, the composition and the killing. The composition is Mr. Pike's timings altered, rope greased, false notice posted, curtain weighted so its stain would read like a headline. He wrote a scene to frame a thief, but the blader that belongs to another hand entirely, and it is that hand we name now. Harrow drew breath to interject. Poirot's palm floated, a conductor's hush, and he moved to the announcement board. First, the pin. He indicated the openly headed needle. It is not a tack. It is a dressmaker's pin, placed at this angle, up and to the right. The wood bears a fresh bite that a right-handed pinner would not make from this position. A left hand set it. A left hand later straightened it when the house blinked, unable to bear its crookedness. Of our company, only to work daily with such pins and are left-handed, he let the names hang in the air unspoken, his eyes sliding once, then away. Second, the weight. From Ellis's folded program he lifted the muslin sachet we had found earlier and poured a thread of pale grains onto his glove. Not lavender headspun is sand mixed with lavender oil. A wardrobe trick, Inspector, used when lead shot is not to hand. It carries a faint veil of colonel, discreet gentleman's scent because the mind that used it wished the smell to travel, to tie many things together. Miss Drake's chin lifted a fraction. Lavender and pumice are standard. I keep lavender to guard the cloth. Any woman who works with wardrobes does. But the mix, Poirot said gently. Hastings, you recall the sill of the manager's window. The grains caught in the paint ridges were of the same even cut. I have smelt the sachets in Miss Drake's cupboard. The same oil, the same sharpness on the finger. He smiled without malice. You are economical, mademoiselle. You fill from the same jar. She returned his look without blinking. You searched my cupboard. I breathed near it, Poirot said. Which is better? He turned to the prop table. Third, the knife, that looks like a knife, the paper knife, was theatre. But the real blade was narrow, long, introduced with sureness. Mr. Pike keeps such a knife, yes, and hid a cloak with it. His sin is already named. Yet wardrobe keeps slender tools, two bodkins, stapikers, button-hooks, filed thin by years. One is missing from Miss Drake's. Try its imprint plain in the velvet pad. Drake's mouth twitched. It was borrowed earlier by Chorus. Tools walk. Then they should walk back, Poirot said mildly. But they have not. He left the table and crossed to Ellis by the lamp. Fourth, the watch. Lady Aurelia called it the hunter case with the dark enamel, the reminder by which Sir Geoffrey made his appointments. It left him warm. Ellis felt it moments before he found it. It travelled into a pocket that would attract no notice, the understudy's cloak, whose lining tore as it swallowed it. The tear is not the clumsy gape of a boy, it has the neat bite of a button-hook pushed through silk too fast. Afterward the clumsy boy patched it, yes, and wrote the repair in the ledger another hand than Miss Drake's. We all saw, but beneath his patch is the faint brown ghost where the enamel rubbed. He gestured toward the gallery. Mr. Pike hid that cloak after, in the trunk by the window, his guilty mind protecting itself, not the killer. Julius North gave a low, involuntary whistle that died as Harrow looked his way. Poirot turned to Miss Lane. Fifth, the quarrel. You heard Pike's clipped rhythm and another voice that would not be raised. Wardrobe lives in whispers. Needles do not like shouting. He faced Catamol. Sixth, the ledger pages burned. Rouge on your desk means little. It is democratic, as I said, but the choice of what to burn is not democratic. The pages we saved were headed L. Catamol and V. Lane, big numbers. ugly terms, the page that would have done the most harm if found one more personal, not merely pecuniary. That page is gone entirely. He turned, at last, to Lady Aurelia. You spoke of Sir Geoffrey reviewing the charities you chair. He enjoyed the power to embarrass. There existed an entry that tethered a lady's private benevolence to a gentleman's vanity. It is not here. Someone chose to spare your reputation, madame. A chivalry or a bargaining chip. I think the latter. A flicker crossed Lady Aurelia's face, irritation at being protected by anyone's choices. I require no rescue, M. Poirot. Just so, he said. You would never have burned your own page. He let the web he had strung quiver in the air, and then he drew the one thread that made the pattern lock, and seventh the tiny thing. In the wardroom when first we spoke, Miss Drake ran a hem with great speed, left hand leading, right feeding, the slant of her tiny oversuing what a tailor calls the bias leans like this. He sketched it on the air with a finger, a rhythmic left-leaning ladder. Tonight, under Ellis's rough patch in the blue silk, there is a little row of errant stitches, 3, no more set before his repair. They lean the same way. A left hand, practiced, began to close the tier in haste, then thought better and sent for a boy to do the rest to provide. You see, the clumsy signature of innocence. Every head swung to Miss Drake. She did not flinch. You expect me to confess because you admire my stitch? No, Poirot said, almost sad. I expect that when you hear the hour strike, you will put down the tool you have carried too long. He held out his gloved palm. Miss Drake, Thelmit is you. Pike composed the spectacle. But you killed Sir Geoffrey Rainsford in the hush after the swell just off the wing, where you meet actors with a pin, a dab of chalk, a whispered mind your hem. He came to you because men like him go to women like you when they want something done quietly, buttons moved, lives altered. You had the staypicker in your sleeve. He said a thing about your work, your place perhaps. He named another woman to replace you. Perhaps he threatened to reveal what you refused. You slipped the blade under the rib. Just so. He did not cry. Out surprise steals the voice. Then, because your mind makes order even of blood, you took his watch to write a story, planted into the cloak whose owner moves unpensured, torn lining mended by a boy, weighted hem ready by your own thrift, pin and note to set the gallery buzzing. You burned the page that would muddy your motive, not money, not jealousy, dignity. You would not be a woman measured by a man's ledger. Thelma Drake had gone very white. At last, she spoke not in the hard, practical tone I had come to expect, but with a steadiness carved from something older. He told me, she said, that the theatre is a room men let women keep tidy, that we may dust the edges while they do the work. He said I made gowns that looked like dreams, so men could applaud other men. A breath that was not quite a laugh. He had sent a girl to observe me. Observe. Her gaze flicked to Miss Lane, then away. And he told me, in that little corner, that after the first week he would have me dismissed for someone more. His word. Pliable. Veil stirred, stricken. Drake. She looked at him, grave. I have bled my fingers on this stage for 15 years. I have stitched men into heroes while they forgot I existed. I could bear another cut on my hand. I would not bear the cut he meant for my life. Harrow stepped forward. Miss Drake, I'm obliged. Wait, Poirot said, his voice still. The softest thing in the room. The watch. You used it to make the hour lie. You pressed the train to stop it at Mr. Pike's swelso. The inspector would marry the wrong minute. But time Leverett persisted in small ways. Its warmth betrayed you. She bowed her head once, the gesture oddly courtly. Yes, she said. I stopped it. Then, with a flicker of dry humor that sat like a last pin on velvet, I am left-handed, M. Poirot. I cannot abide a crooked line. There was a rustle in the house like rain. Not shock, exactly. Rather the sound a room makes when understanding goes through it from back to front. Lady Aurelia rose. Thelma, she said quietly. Drake's eyes did not go to her. Do not pity me, my lady. You taught me, without meaning to, that a woman may keep her back straight, or her place. I tried for both. Tonight I learned which men prefer. Harrow moved again, and this time Poirot did not stay him. The constables approached. Drake did not resist. She laid the small scissors she had been holding on the prop table very neatly, parallel to the edge. It was the tidiness that undid me. Mr. Pike, in the doorway under guard, made a sound that was almost a groan. I never meant, you meant a picture, Drake said without turning. I used it." Poirot looked not triumphant, but very tired. "There remains," he said softly to Harrow, "the matter of the burned ledger and the cloak in the trunk, accessories to a crime. You will weigh them, but the hand that entered the rib, that is here." Harrow nodded once, curt as a man, at last given a steady floor. "Thelma Drake, I must ask you to come with us." She straightened the little row of pins in her magnet dish. 1, 2, 3, then stepped forward between the constables as though walking out to take a bow. At the wing she paused, looked once up into the dark where an audience might have been, and then was gone. Poirot stood very still. The theatre seemed to exhale. After a while he said, "To no one and to the air we tidy, but blood is not lint. It remembers." He turned to Lady Aurelia and inclined his head with grave courtesy. "Madame, I think, for tonight, the curtain may at last fall." Chapter 17. The quiet after the curtain. The theatre was never truly silent, but that night it came as close as I had ever known. After Thelma Drake was led away, the building seemed to sag into itself. The gaslights hissed faintly in the wings, their steady breath the only sound for a long moment. Chairs sat askew. The air smelled faintly of dust and lavender oil, and a faint draught slid under the stage door, carrying the cool dampness of the street. It felt as if the performance had ended, but no applause had come. Poirot stood near the prop table, gazing at the row of pins Drake had so neatly aligned before leaving, his head inclined slightly, as though in acknowledgement of a final, wordless gesture. I had seen him triumphant before, his bright voice cutting with precision, but now he looked almost somber, as though the satisfaction of being right could not outweigh the cost of the truth he had revealed. Inspector Harrow moved briskly in the gallery, conferring with constables, issuing instructions in a low tone. From the doorway, the echo of Drake's footsteps had already faded into the street, swallowed by the city. The inspector descended the aisle toward us, his boots on the boards sounding unnaturally loud. "We'll see to Pike next," he said. "Accessory at the very least. But it's the woman's hand that carried the blade." Poirot nodded, eyes still on the pins. "You will, perhaps, find that she left nothing careless behind. Miss Drake has tidied her corner for the last time." His voice carried no bitterness, only a quiet respect for the completeness of her work, even in defeat. Lady Aurelia had not moved since Drake's departure. Her gloved hands rested on the back of a seat, and she watched Poirot with the calm of someone weighing what could and could not be spoken aloud. "Do you think she regrets it?" she asked softly, turned to her. "Regret is for those who act in haste. Madame, Miss Drake acted after long reflection. I suspect her only regret is that she could not make her case without the blade." Vale, the stage manager, emerged from the shadows near the prompt corner. He looked pale, though his usual briskness clung to him like a costume he had not yet taken off. "The company will be shattered by this," he said. "Wardrobe has been her kingdom. You'll find nothing out of place there." Poirot stepped toward him. "You speak as though the theatre will mourn her absence more than the man who lies dead." Vale's gaze shifted toward the darkened stage. Sir Geoffrey was difficult, demanding in ways that drained a company. He believed himself indispensable, and in some ways he was. But Thelma, she kept us from fraying entirely. She understood what people needed before they asked. His voice caught, and he looked away. "I am not saying she was right, only that the gap she leaves will be felt." Julius North, the playwright, had been silent since the arrest. Now he cleared his throat. "If she wanted to preserve dignity, she's achieved the opposite. The papers will relish this. Murderous seamstress of the stage. It will run." For weeks Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "North, I would counsel restraint in how you speak of her. You build scenes for applause. She lived in the wings, unseen, and made choices with no expectation of an audience. The difference is not small." From the far side of the stalls, Miss Lane approached. She seemed smaller without the bustle of rehearsal around her. Her voice, hushed. "She told me once that sewing a hem was like building a wall. Every stitch, a brick, I suppose." This was her last wall. She looked at Poirot, almost pleading. Was she protecting me? Poirot studied her face for a moment before answering. "Perhaps. Or perhaps she wished to keep you from standing where she stood, measured, dismissed. She may have thought you too young to bear it." Miss Lane nodded faintly, though it was clear his words did not settle her mind. Harrow returned, having sent Pike under guard to the waiting carriage. "We'll have to take statements tomorrow," he said. "Too late tonight for the rest of it." His eyes went to Poirot. "You'll be at the station in the morning." Poirot inclined his head. "At your service, Inspector. There are still details to lay straight, and I do not like crooked lines any more than Miss Drake." The inspector gave a short, humorless laugh, and left to oversee the last of his men. One by one, the remaining company began to disperse, their footsteps echoing in the great, empty chamber. At last, only Poirot and I remained. The stage was a ghost of its self-painted flats looming in dim light, ropes swaying slightly above. Poirot wandered to the wings and touched the edge of the blue silk cloak, now hanging limp from a hook. "It will be mended again," he murmured, "by another hand, but the tear beneath will always be there." I said nothing, sensing he was speaking as much to himself as to me. After a pause, he turned and gestured toward the door. "Come, mon ami. The night has played its final act. Tomorrow, we attend the epilogue." We stepped out into the fog-choked street. Behind us, the theatre's door closed with a soft thud, and I could almost imagine that somewhere inside, in the quiet wardrobe room, the last pin still gleamed under the lamp, waiting for a hand that would never return. Chapter 18. The Final. About the next morning, the air in London carried a thin, metallic chill, as though the fog itself had drawn in a breath and refused to release it. At Scotland Yard, the smell of coal smoke clung to the corridors, mixing with the faint tank of ink and damp paper. Inspector Harrow had summoned all those still connected to the case, the playwright, the stage manager, Miss Lane, Lady Aurelia, and myself, into a modest interview room. At the far end, Poirot sat with perfect composure, his gloved hands folded neatly upon the table. Thelma Drake was not there. Harrow informed us she had signed a statement late in the night, admitting to the stabbing of Sir Geoffrey Rainsford. "She gave us just enough to close the book," Harrow said, "but it's all too neat. I expect our Belgian friend here agrees." Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed, mon cher Inspector, too neat, too simple. Miss Drake has given you the ending you expect, but not the ending that is true." A ripple of unease passed through the room. Vale shifted in his chair, and Julius North leaned forward. "If she's confessed, what more is there?" Poirot rose, moving to the center of the room with the ease of a man stepping onto a stage. He now commanded, "Miss Drake is a woman of skill, precision, and loyalty, but she is not a woman of violence. Oh, she has needle and scissors in hand every day, but her craft is the making of things, not their unmaking. That night, her task was to shield another." He turned his gaze upon Pike, the theatre's props master, who had been silent until now. "Monsieur Pike, the dagger used was from your domain. A stage prop, dulled along its edge but with a point sharpened recently, not by accident. Only one with access to your locked cabinet could prepare it so." Pike's face reddened, but he did not speak. Poirot pressed on. "The clue was in the curtain. The blood spread down the fold nearest the scene flat, not directly where Sir Geoffrey fell. He was already bleeding when the curtain was brushed against him. Someone moved him, placed him as the curtain rose. For effect and effect, too theatrical for a seamstress, but perfect for one who dresses the stage." Miss Lane gasped softly, realization dawning. "You mean Pike was the hand?" Poirot finished. "Miss Drake saw him strike. She knew what would come if the truth were told: his dismissal, disgrace, and the ruin of one more player in the fragile company she had spent her life holding together. She took the guilt upon herself, confident she could make the scene tidy." Pike's shoulders sagged. His voice came out low, roughened by defeat. "He was going to shut us down, take the play, the costumes, the set, everything to a West End house, and replace us all. Said we were small-town talent. Said Thelma's work was wasted on nobodies. I lost my temper." He glanced at Vale, shame in his eyes. "She begged me to go, said she'd handle it." Harrow exhaled heavily. "So we've been chasing the wrong lead." Poirot lifted a hand. "Not wrong, Inspector, merely incomplete. Without Miss Drake's confession, M. Pike might have fled, leaving the company under suspicion for weeks. Her sacrifice gave us a single thread to follow. And when one follows the right thread," he mimed, drawing something between his fingers, "the whole cloth reveals itself." Lady Aurelia spoke at last, her voice like the soft crack of silk. "So she'll still stand trial?" "Yes," Madame Poirot said, "but not for the crime of murder. For obstruction, perhaps. Her days of sewing costumes may be ended, but her life will not end in a cell." There was no triumph in his tone, only a certain inevitability. like the final note of a song that had been playing long before we entered the room. By midday, statements had been taken. Pike led away without resistance, and Miss Drake brought back from her cell to face the altered charge. She met Poirot's eyes as she passed him, and though no words were exchanged, the smallest of nods passed between them, a mutual recognition that each had done their work in their own way. Outside, the fog had begun to lift, revealing the pale winter sun. Poirot and I walked together toward the embankment, the Thames glinting dully beyond the railings. "A curious business, Poirot," I said. "A crime in a theatre, but the true drama was all behind the scenes." He smiled faintly. "Ah, Hastings, but that is always suing the theatre. In life, the scene the audience sees is but the front. The real story is in the wings, where the curtains are frayed and the actors remove their masks." We walked on in silence for a while. Somewhere behind us, the Belvedere Theatre still stood, its doors closed, its stage dark, but I could not help thinking that when the curtain rose again, it would never be quite the same.